Mrs. Johnson's daughter asked to have coffee with the millionaire single father. His response changed everything forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The January rain fell heavily over New York, turning the streets into rushing rivers and traffic into chaos. Sarah Johnson watched from the window of the crowded bus as droplets ran down the foggy glass, tracing winding paths that seemed to mirror her own journey. At 28, she clutched a worn black folder against her chest, containing her nutrition degree, certificates from online courses she had sacrificed for, and a resume printed on high-quality paper, an extravagance she had allowed herself on this special day. Central Park Towers loomed majestically on Fifth Avenue, its three mirrored buildings reflecting the heavy clouds. Sarah had never entered there as a visitor. She had only heard the stories her mother, Mrs. Johnson, told about the luxurious apartments, the state-of-the-art barbecues on the balconies, and the private elevators. Mrs. Johnson had worked as a housekeeper in apartment 1501 for 15 years, ever since Sarah was 13, and they had to restart their lives in New York after her father died in a work accident in rural Pennsylvania. "Good afternoon, miss," greeted the doorman upon seeing her at the reception, immediately recognizing the resemblance to Mrs. Johnson. "Is your mother expecting you?" "Actually, I came to deliver a document personally to Dr. Richard Miller," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nerves. "My mother knows I'm coming, but I prefer not to disturb her during work hours." The doorman raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but maintained his professional demeanor. After a brief call to confirm, he pointed to the guest elevator. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Guest elevator. Not the service one her mother used every day for 15 years. That small difference carried immense symbolic weight. The triplex apartment occupied the top 3 floors of the building. When the elevator doors opened directly into the private foyer, Sarah had to control her expression of astonishment. The floor was made of genuine Italian marble, with golden veins that looked like rivers of light under the recessed lighting. Modern paintings adorned the walls in neutral tones, and a Czech crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, casting subtle rainbows throughout the space. "Sarah, my daughter, you didn't have to—" Mrs. Johnson hurried in from a side corridor, drying her hands on an impeccably clean apron. She was a 52-year-old woman with graying hair tied in a low bun, a face marked by time, but with still bright eyes. She wore the uniform that Sarah hated to see her in, a gray dress, white apron, black closed-toe shoes. "Mom, I didn't come to visit during work," Sarah said gently, touching her mother's arm. "I came for a professional matter. Dr. Miller knows I'm here." Before Mrs. Johnson could respond, the unmistakable aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. It was a different, sophisticated smell, not the supermarket coffee Sarah was used to, but something richer, with woody notes. Premium Colombian coffee, she mentally identified, recalling her classes on gastronomy and food quality. "Celia, can you bring the coffee to the office, please?" A deep male voice came from somewhere on the upper floor, accustomed to giving orders. "And more hot milk for David. He's complaining that his chocolate has cooled down again." "I'll be right there, Dr. Miller," Mrs. Johnson replied automatically, casting a worried glance at Sarah before hurrying toward the kitchen. Sarah stood there in the foyer, feeling out of place between two worlds. She tightened her grip on the folder, remembering why she was there. It wasn't a favor. It wasn't her mother's connection. It was her own merit. She had developed an innovative sports nutrition project, specifically for weightlifters and high-performance athletes, and Richard Miller owned Fit Life Gym, one of the largest gym chains in New York, with 12 locations throughout the city and plans for expansion into Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Footsteps descending the spiral staircase made Sarah look up. Richard Miller appeared like a nearly cinematic figure, 6 feet, tall, broad shoulders, perfectly filling out a navy blue dress shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, tailored black pants, and slightly tousled dark brown hair, as if he had run his hands through it several times that morning. He was 36 years old, but looked a few years younger except for his eyes. There was a deep exhaustion in those brown eyes, an old sadness that no amount of professional success could completely mask. Clinging to his right leg, descending the steps with adorable difficulty, was a boy of about 7. David Miller was a miniature version of his father. The same messy dark hair, the same pronounced bone structure, but with lighter eyes, a honey tone he had likely inherited from his deceased mother. He wore a complete school uniform, a white polo shirt, navy shorts, and spotless sneakers, but had chocolate smudges around his mouth and a sulky expression that betrayed a tough morning. "Dad, I don't want to go to school today," the boy grumbled, still clinging to his father's leg. "My stomach hurts again." "David, we've talked about this," Richard replied with clearly tested patience. "You can't miss more classes." The coordinator has called me 3 times this month." It was then that Richard finally noticed Sarah in the foyer, and his expression shifted from paternal exhaustion to cautious professionalism. He quickly assessed her from head to toe, not disrespectfully, but with the analytical gaze of someone used to evaluating people and situations in seconds. "You must be Mrs. Johnson's daughter," he said, and it wasn't a question. Sarah Johnson, newly graduated nutritionist from the University of New York, internship at New York Medical Center, 3 articles published in online nutrition journals. "Sport nutrition." He paused, and a near smile touched his lips. "You didn't expect me to do my research before meeting you." Sarah felt her face heat up, but maintained her upright posture. "Honestly, Dr. Miller, I expected you to. It would be concerning if the owner of a company of your stature met people without checking credentials." The near smile transformed into something genuine for a moment. "Touché. And you can call me Richard when we're not in a formal setting, so—" He patted his son's back, encouraging him to let go of his leg. "You mentioned in the email that you wanted to present a project. Usually these things go through HR first, then regional managers, and only reach me after 3 layers of approval. Why did you want to skip the whole process?" "Because innovation dies in bureaucracy," Sarah replied without hesitation, opening her folder and pulling out a professionally bound presentation. "I have a project that could revolutionize how your gyms handle sports nutrition. It's not just a personalized menu or basic tracking. It's an integrated system that combines metabolic assessment, real-time adjustments based on performance, and progressive nutritional education. But to explain it properly, I need more than 5 minutes between meetings. I need time, attention, and someone who understands the disruptive potential of what I'm proposing." Richard accepted the presentation, quickly flipping through the first pages. His furrowed brow began to soften page by page, replaced by a look of genuine interest. David, bored with the adult conversation, had approached Sarah and was staring at her with the unfiltered curiosity of children. "Do you know my Grandma Celia?" the boy asked directly. "She makes the best brownies in the whole world." "I do know her," Sarah replied, crouching down to meet the boy's eye level. "She's my mom. And I agree with you about the brownies." David's eyes widened. "Really? So you can make good brownies too?" "David, don't interrupt," Richard gently reprimanded, but Sarah raised her hand. "I can make some good things, yes, including a special hot chocolate that won't give you a stomachache and even has hidden vitamins." "Hidden vitamins?" David scrunched his nose, skeptical. "Does that exist?" "It does. And it's delicious, believe me." Richard closed the presentation and looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There was surprise there, certainly, perhaps budding respect, and something more, a spark of possibility that he seemed to be considering against his own controlling nature. "Can I have coffee with you?" Sarah then asked, the phrase coming out bolder than she had planned. "To present the full project? Answer your questions, discuss implementation. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm offering a legitimate business opportunity, but I need adequate time to make my proposal worthwhile." The silence that followed was thick. Mrs. Johnson had returned with the coffee tray and froze upon hearing her daughter's question, clearly horrified by the boldness. David looked between his father and Sarah as if watching a tennis match. Richard ran his hand through his hair, the gesture that constantly dishevelled it, and Sarah saw the exact moment he made a decision. "Tomorrow, 6 in the morning, at my main office in the Gardens unit. Not just coffee, a full breakfast. Bring concrete data, financial projections, cost-benefit analysis, and 3 case studies of similar successes." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. "And Sarah, if you're going to waste my time, this will be the first and last time we meet professionally. Understood?" Sarah extended her hand, firm and determined. "I'll be there at 6 in the morning, and I guarantee it won't be wasted time." When their hands touched for the formal handshake, Sarah felt an electric current run through her arm. From Richard's slightly widened eyes, he felt it too, but they both pretended not to, maintaining professionalism. As Sarah said her goodbyes and walked back to the elevator, Mrs. Johnson followed her with a gaze full of conflicting worry and pride. And Richard Miller, returning to his office with the presentation in hand, and his son finally willing to go to school after the promise of special chocolate, couldn't help but look back one last time. Something had changed that rainy January morning. Something neither of them could yet name, but which was already beginning to transform the course of their lives. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, and Sarah had already been awake for 20 minutes, mentally reviewing every slide of the presentation, every number of the financial projections, every comma of the case studies she had translated from English during the night. Her tiny room in the 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother in the East Village was illuminated only by the bluish light of the laptop, papers scattered all over the single bed, 3 empty coffee cups stacked on the nightstand. "Honey, did you not sleep at all?" Mrs. Johnson's voice came from the door, concerned. She wore her faded robe, her hair loose for the first time in weeks, looking smaller and more fragile without the bun she always kept. "I slept a few hours," Sarah lied, closing the laptop and starting to organize the documents in order in the folder. "Mom, you shouldn't be awake. Your shift doesn't start until 8 today." "How can I sleep knowing my daughter is meeting Dr. Richard at 6 in the morning?" Mrs. Johnson entered the room, sitting on the edge of the bed, her calloused hands, marked by years of bleach and cleaning products, nervously smoothed the fabric of the robe. "Sarah, I need to say something, and you need to listen to me." Sarah stopped organizing the papers, recognizing her mother's serious tone. "I'm listening." "Dr. Richard, he's a good man. I swear to God he is. He's never treated me poorly. He's always been respectful, pays on time, and gave me all the time off when you graduated. When I got sick last year—" Mrs. Johnson paused, choosing her words carefully. "But he is complicated, dear. Ever since Dr. Emily passed away, he has shut himself off. He works 18 hours a day, travels constantly, barely sees David grow up. That boy spends more time with me than with his own father. Mum, I'm not going to meet him as a person. It's a professional business meeting," Sarah tried to explain, but Mrs. Johnson shook her head. "I saw how he looked at you yesterday, and I saw how you looked back." The mother's eyes were misty. "Sarah, My daughter, you have fought so hard to get where you are. You finished college, working during the day and studying at night, took courses, unpaid internships, skipped lunches to save money for materials. You deserve every opportunity in this world. But what, Mom? But his world. Mrs. Johnson gestured vaguely, as if she could encompass the entire universe of Central Park Towers with her hands. It's not ours, dear. His ex-mother-in-law, Dr. Beatrice, when she comes to visit David, she barely looks at me. She treats us like we're invisible. And there are more people like that in that circle, people who will judge you, who will say you only succeeded because of me, who will invent malice where there is none. Sarah knelt in front of her mother, holding her calloused hands between hers. I know, Mom, I know all of this. But if I let the fear of what they will think stop me, then I've already lost before I even start. This project is good, it's solid. It has scientific foundation, economic viability, scalability potential. It's not a favor, it's not a connection. It's serious work. I know it is, my daughter. God knows how hard you worked. Mrs. Johnson squeezed her daughter's hands. Just promise me one thing. Don't get lost on this path. Don't let anyone diminish you. You are a nutritionist, you are a professional, you are competent. You are not the maid's daughter. You are Sarah Johnson, and that is enough. The two embraced there, in the tiny room that smelled of coffee and determination as New York began to wake outside. When they finally separated, Sarah had dry eyes, but a heart tight with mixed gratitude and fear. The administrative headquarters of Fit Life Gym was located on Haddock Lobo Street, in the heart of the Gardens, a modern glass office building that reflected the still dark sky at 5:45 in the morning. Sarah got off the subway at the Consolation Station and walked the remaining 10 minutes, her medium-heeled shoes, the only ones she owned suitable for meetings, echoing in the silence of the still sleeping city. The receptionist directed her to the 12th floor. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah found herself in a completely different environment from Raphael's luxurious apartment. It was functional, corporate, glass walls dividing meeting rooms, workstations with state-of-the-art computers, a fully equipped gym visible through another glass wall. Of course, the owner of a gym chain would have one in his own office. On time. I like that. Raphael's voice came from a room at the end of the hallway. He was standing next to an oval conference table, surrounded by computer screens and stacks of reports. He wore a white dress shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up to the middle of his forearms, dark grey dress pants. His hair was wet, as if he had just come out of the shower or the gym. Coffee just finished brewing. Do you take it with sugar? No sugar, no milk, Sarah replied, entering the room and placing her folder on the table. And I prefer espresso if you have it. A purist. Raphael flashed that almost smile again while preparing 2 small cups of coffee in the professional machine set up in a corner of the room. Most people who come in here ask for cappuccino with 3 packets of sugar and judge me for drinking black coffee. I'm not here to be like most people, Sarah replied, accepting the cup he offered her. The porcelain was fine, delicate, with the discreet Fit Life Gym logo in gold. I'm here to show something different. Then show me. Raphael sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. You have an hour before my first official meeting. Surprise me. Sarah connected her laptop to a projector and began. It wasn't just a slide presentation. It was a complete experience. She had brought samples of natural supplements she proposed to use, printed menus on high-quality parchment paper, 3-dimensional graphs showing the performance curve of athletes before and after proper nutritional intervention. The problem with current sports nutrition in Brazil is that it is either too generic or too restrictive, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her nerves. Gyms either offer nothing or provide those printed menus with 3 options: lose weight, gain mass, maintain. But the human body doesn't work that way. Every metabolism is unique. Every person has a different response to the same foods. I know that, Raphael interrupted, but without hostility. Continue. My proposal is to create metabolic assessment hubs in each FitLife unit. They don't need to be huge. A space of 20 square meters is sufficient. There, we conduct detailed bioimpedance, basic food sensitivity testing, real body composition analysis, not those simple gym scales, professional equipment, the kind used in hospitals. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing concrete numbers. The initial cost per unit, $280,000. Equipment, staff training, integrated management software, marketing campaigns. It seems expensive, but look at the return. Each complete assessment costs the client $400. A single nutritionist can conduct 8 assessments a day. In 3 months, each unit pays off the initial investment. After that, it's pure profit. $400 per assessment. Raphael raised an eyebrow, picking up a pen. Sarah was taking notes in a notebook. Does the market accept this price? The market already pays this and more at private clinics, Sarah countered, opening a secondary laptop and showing a comparative spreadsheet. I mapped 17 sports nutrition clinics in New York. The average price for a complete metabolic assessment is $520. We're offering the same service, 23% cheaper, with the convenience of being right inside the gym where the person trains. It's an obvious competitive advantage. Richard stood up, walking to the window that overlooked Fifth Avenue, which was starting to fill up. Sarah could see his mind working, processing the numbers, assessing risks and opportunities. He was meticulous, that was clear. Every piece of information was weighed, measured, and internally questioned before any external reaction. And what's the differentiator? He asked without turning around. Why would someone come to my gym for this assessment instead of an established clinic with a well-known nutritionist with years in the market? Because of the second phase of the project. Sarah also stood up, moving closer but maintaining a respectful professional distance. The assessment is just the beginning. After that, we offer monthly follow-ups, meal plan adjustments based on actual training results, consulting through an app. I'm developing one. I can show you the prototype. Free monthly workshops on specific topics, proper supplementation, hydration for high performance, pre- and post-workout nutrition. You want to turn gyms into centers for nutritional education, Richard concluded, finally turning to face her. There was something different in his eyes now, no longer the polite skepticism, but genuine interest. Exactly, and there's more. Sarah returned to the laptop, opening a video. Partnerships with universities. I have contacts at NYU, Columbia, and CUNY. We can turn FitLife locations into research hubs, generating real data on sports nutrition in the American population. Imagine the prestige. The first gym chain in the US that not only offers services but produces scientific knowledge. Richard watched the video in silence. It featured testimonials from university professors that Sarah had managed to convince to record supportive messages for the project. When it ended, he turned off the projector and switched on the regular lights in the room. "Did you prepare this all by yourself?" he asked. "I had help from some college friends with the more complex financial projections. The rest, yes, that was me." "How long did it take?" 3 months of intense work, plus another 8 months of research before that. Richard sat back down, but this time his body was leaning forward, a posture of someone engaged in the conversation. "You mentioned an app. Show me." Sarah grabbed her phone, a simple but functional model, and opened the prototype she had developed with the help of a programmer friend. It's still in beta, but the idea is this. The client logs in with their gym details, syncs with their training record, and the app suggests automatic nutritional adjustments based on the type of exercise for the day. She handed the phone to Richard, who began navigating the app with the agility of someone accustomed to technology. Clean interface, intuitive. He clicked on a few tabs, testing functionalities. But what about the legal issue? A health app needs to be registered with the FDA. Certification. I'm already taking care of that, Sarah interrupted. I have pro bono legal consulting from a firm that works with startups. They told me it takes an average of 6 months. Until then, the app functions as an educational tool, not as a medical prescription. It sidesteps the legal issue. Smart. Richard returned the phone, but his fingers lingered a second longer than necessary in contact. They both noticed, and both pretended not to. Very smart, actually. Have you thought about the maintenance costs of the app? Server, updates, technical support. $32,000 annually, divided among the 12 locations. That's $2,660 a month per location. It's less than the salary of a receptionist. Sarah had an answer for everything, and Richard was clearly impressed. They spent the next half hour immersed in spreadsheets, projections, hypothetical scenarios. Richard tested every piece of information, questioned every number, looking for flaws in the reasoning. Sarah countered every question with data, studies, concrete evidence. It was an intense intellectual duel, and both were clearly enjoying the challenge. "Daddy!" The child's voice exploded in the concentrated silence of the meeting. David burst into the room, still in his Spider-Man pajamas, followed by a woman in uniform who must have been the nanny. "You promised to have coffee with me today. Aunt Laura said you're busy, but you promised." The transformation in Richard was instant. The relentless executive disappeared, replaced by a clearly guilty father. "David, son, I know I promised, but an important meeting came up and—" "You always say that." The boy crossed his arms, his chin trembling. "You always have an important meeting." Sarah saw the pain flash across Richard's face, quick but deep. She remembered what her mother had said. "That boy spends more time with me than with his own father." "David," Sarah knelt in front of the boy, meeting his honey-colored eyes. "Do you know what I brought today? Ingredients to make that special hot chocolate I promised you. How about we make it together and your dad can have breakfast with us? That way no one is left out." David looked at his father, waiting for permission. Richard seemed torn between gratitude for Sarah's intervention and discomfort for needing her help. "Please, Daddy," David asked, with that voice no father can deny. "All right," Richard conceded, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Sarah was starting to recognize as his nervous tic. "But afterward, you're going to school without complaining, okay?" "Okay." The corporate kitchen at FitLife was equipped as if it were a TV cooking show. Industrial stove, double stainless steel refrigerator, professional utensils. Sarah worked efficiently, mixing high-quality cocoa powder with... David was sitting at the counter, swinging his legs, watching every movement with fascination. "My Grandma Johnson doesn't put these things in her chocolate." "Your grandma." "Johnson makes chocolate the traditional way, which is also delicious," Sarah explained while stirring the pot. "But since you're a boy who trains a lot, I saw the pictures of your judo classes in the apartment. You need a chocolate that makes you strong for training." "You saw my pictures?" David looked simultaneously embarrassed and proud. "I did. Your grandma showed me one day. She's very proud of you." Richard was watching everything from his place against the wall, with an expression that Sarah couldn't fully interpret. There was surprise there, definitely, but also something softer, more vulnerable, as if he were seeing something he didn't know he needed until that moment. When Sarah served the hot chocolate in 3 mugs, a smaller one for David, decorated with a dinosaur sticker she had brought especially, the 3 of them sat at the small table next to the kitchen. It was a strangely domestic scene, almost intimate, completely out of the context of a corporate meeting. "This is really good," David exclaimed after the first sip, leaving a chocolate mustache. "It doesn't even taste like it has vitamins, because vitamins don't taste like medicine when they come. And from the right food," Sarah explained, wiping the boy's mustache with a napkin. The gesture was so natural, so maternal, that she only realized what she had done when she felt Richard's intense gaze on her. "Sarah," Richard began, his voice lower, more personal than it had been during the entire meeting. "Do you have family? Siblings? Little cousins?" "No, I'm an only child. My mum had complications during childbirth and couldn't have more children." Sarah took a sip of her own hot chocolate, the warmth going down her throat and warming her empty stomach. She had forgotten to eat anything since dinner the night before. Why? Because you're natural with kids. A lot of people freeze up, don't know how to talk, how to act. You don't. Sarah shrugged. "I used to help my mom take care of the neighbors' kids when I was younger. We needed extra money and I liked it. Kids are honest. They don't have a filter. They don't pretend to like you if they don't. It's refreshing." "Are you going to work with my dad?" David asked suddenly, still halfway through his chocolate. "I don't know yet," Sarah answered honestly. "It depends on your dad thinking my work is good enough." "I think it's good," David declared with the absolute confidence of childhood. "You make tasty chocolate and know about dinosaurs." "I didn't know you knew about dinosaurs," Richard commented, raising an eyebrow. "I saw the books on his shelf in the apartment," Sarah explained. "I recognized the titles. I loved dinosaurs when I was a kid. I wanted to be a paleontologist before I discovered nutrition." "What's your favorite?" David asked, excited. "Ankylosaurus, the one that looks like a tank, with armor on its back and a club on its tail." "Cool. Mine is the Velociraptor." "Classic. Good choice." Richard watched the interaction with an expression that shifted between tenderness and something heavier, sadder. Sarah realized he was watching his son interact naturally with a female figure, something that probably hadn't happened since the boy's mother passed away 3 years earlier. When David finished his chocolate and was taken by the nanny to get ready for school, not before making Sarah promise she would make the special chocolate again, silence returned to the corporate kitchen. Richard collected the mugs, washing them personally in the sink instead of leaving them for the cleaning staff to do later. "About the project," he finally said, his back to her, water running over the mugs. "I need to present it to the partners, do a complete risk analysis, consult our legal department about the contractual implications." Sarah's heart sank. It was a polite refusal. She recognized the tone. "But," Richard continued, turning off the tap and facing her, "I want you to be present in those meetings, as an external consultant initially. A fee of $5,000 a month for the next 3 months while we develop the pilot project in a test. A unit. If it works, and I have a feeling it will, we'll expand to the other units and you'll become an integral part of the team. Salary compatible with a senior manager, full benefits, profit sharing." Sarah blinked, processing. You're hiring me?" "I'm offering a trial partnership with a strong possibility of evolving into a permanent position," Richard corrected, but there was a genuine smile now. "You impressed me, Sarah, not just with the numbers, but with the passion. You believe in what you're proposing, and that interaction with David." He paused. "You have something that doesn't show up in spreadsheets. You have humanity, and my company needs that." "I accept," Sarah replied without hesitation, extending her hand. "And thank you for seeing beyond my mother's last name." Richard shook her hand, the touch lingering longer than strictly professional for the second time that morning. "Thank you for giving me the chance to see your real work. Now we'll have many meetings ahead, many late nights discussing strategies, many challenges to overcome." "I'm ready," Sarah said, and she believed it completely. But as she left the Fit Life Gym corporate building that January morning, with a signed consulting contract in her folder and her heart racing faster than the business numbers justified, Sarah had no way of knowing that that improvised morning coffee in the corporate kitchen was just the first of many, and that every cup of coffee, every conversation about macronutrients and financial projections, every interaction with the boy with honey-colored eyes, was weaving something. It was much more complex and profound than a simple professional relationship. The phone rang as she was entering the subway. It was Mrs. Johnson. "So, sweetheart, how did it go?" Sarah smiled, clutching the folder to her chest. "Mom, it did it. He hired me." On the other end of the line, she heard her mother's muffled sob as she tried not to cry in the middle of her workday. "I knew it, my daughter. I always knew you would succeed." And at that moment, descending the stairs of the Consolation subway station, with the January sun finally breaking through the clouds outside, Sarah Johnson allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could really make it. Not just the project, but something bigger, something she didn't even dare to name yet. The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of meetings, endless spreadsheets, and 6 a.m. coffees that became a sacred ritual. Sarah quickly discovered that Richard Miller was not just meticulous, he was obsessively perfectionistic. Every comma in the contract with suppliers was reviewed 3 times. Every piece of equipment for the pilot unit was personally tested before approval. Every detail of the nutritional care protocol underwent his relentless scrutiny. "This initial assessment questionnaire has 43 questions," Richard commented on a rainy Tuesday in March, flipping through the document Sarah had prepared. It was 7:15 in the morning, and they were in the conference room. On the 12th floor, for the 12th time that month, the average client will give up by question 20. "The average client who gives up at question 20 is not our target audience," Sarah countered, pouring herself more coffee from the thermos that had now become a constant presence in their meetings. She had brought coffee from home, a special blend she bought from an artisanal roastery in Brooklyn, stretching her tight budget, but refusing to drink the bland corporate coffee. Richard had noticed the difference at the first sip and never commented again when she arrived with her own bottle. "Our target audience is those who take health seriously enough to answer 43 questions if it means real results." "Touché," Richard murmured, jotting notes in the margins of the document with his angular, tight handwriting. "But there needs to be a condensed version for those who just want basic guidance. Not everyone who works out wants to be an Olympic athlete." "I agree. Basic version, 15 questions, general guidance, no deep metabolic analysis. Complete version, 43 questions, detailed analysis, monthly follow-up included. 2 service levels, 2 different prices." "Now that's more like it." Richard closed the document, satisfied. "See how much easier it is when you accept constructive criticism." "I always accept constructive criticism," Sarah retorted, but there was humor in her voice. They had developed a particular dynamic over those weeks, a constant game of tension and collaboration, disagreements followed by solutions, mutual challenges that always resulted in something better than either could have created alone. The problem is distinguishing constructive criticism from paralyzing perfectionism. Paralyzing perfectionism? Richard raised an eyebrow, but his lips quivered with a contained smile. "Is that how you describe my quality standards? When you spend 40 minutes debating whether the logo on the nutritionist's lab coats should be embroidered or silk-screened, yes, I call that paralyzing perfectionism. Details matter. Details matter when they impact the client experience. The client is not going to look at the lab coat and think, wow, what a well-made embroidery. They will want to know if the nutritionist knows what they're doing. "Dad! Sarah!" David's voice echoed down the hallway before the door swung open. The boy rushed in, his Spider-Man backpack hanging off his back, his school uniform already half untidy, despite it being only 7:30 in the morning. "Aunt Laura said you guys are here." Again! David had become a constant presence in the morning meetings. After that first morning coffee, the boy simply refused to go to school without stopping by his father's office to have chocolate with Sarah. Richard had tried to resist in the early days. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't professional, it created complicated precedents. But David's tantrum was greater than his need for control. "Good morning, champ," Sarah greeted, already grabbing the thermos that she now brought every day. "Guess what I have here today? Special chocolate?" David jumped excitedly. "Not just chocolate. Banana pancakes with peanut butter. No sugar, no white flour, just good ingredients." The boy's eyes widened. "Pancakes? Seriously?" "Seriously. But you'll have to help me heat them up in the break room microwave." David was already pulling Sarah's hand out of the room before she could protest. Richard watched the two leave, that expression on Sarah's face that she still couldn't fully decipher. Something between gratitude, melancholy, and a third feeling she didn't dare to name. In the break room, as the pancakes spun in the microwave, David chattered about his judo class from the previous day, about the new friend who had a dad who was an astronaut, unlikely, but Sarah didn't correct him, about how he was learning to read better and could now read dinosaur books by himself. "You know what I wish," David suddenly said, becoming serious in a way only children can, changing the subject without transition. "I wish you were my science teacher at school." "Why?" Sarah asked, taking the pancakes out of the microwave and placing them on a plate with a superhero design. "Because you explain things well. You don't just use hard words to sound smart, and you know about food and the body, and how things work." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. "Doesn't your dad explain these things to you?" David shrugged, already attacking the pancakes with a plastic fork and knife. "Dad knows about the gym and muscles and exercise, but he doesn't really like to talk about feelings and stuff. Grandma Johnson talks to me more about that." "Your Grandma Johnson is very wise," Sarah said gently. "And your dad loves you very much, David. Sometimes adults don't know. Expressing it the right way doesn't mean they don't feel." "I know he loves me," David replied with the absolute simplicity of childhood, "but he's always tired, always working. Ever since Mom went to heaven, he works all the time." Sarah didn't know what to say. Mrs. Johnson had told her a bit about Emily Miller, a brilliant architect from a traditional family who died in a car accident coming back from a meeting with clients in Connecticut. David was only 4 years old at the time, old enough to remember his mother, too young to fully understand the permanence of loss. "You know what I think?" Sarah finally said, sitting down next to the boy. "I think your dad works so much because he's scared to stop, to be still, because then he has to feel how much he misses your mum, and that hurts a lot." David stopped chewing, processing. "Do you do that too? Work so you don't feel sad?" The question hit Sarah like a punch. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When my dad died, I was 13, and for a long time I studied as much as I could, helped my mum with everything, kept busy, you know, because when I stopped, the sadness was too big. And now, is it still big? Is it still? Now it's different. The sadness doesn't go away, but you learn to live with it. Like a heavy coat that you always carry, but it gets lighter over time. You don't forget, but you learn to move on." David nodded seriously. "I think Dad's coat is still very heavy. I think so too, champ, I think so too." When they returned to the conference room, David finishing the last bite of his pancake, Richard was on the phone, his voice tense and controlled, in a way that Sarah had already learned to recognize as a sign of trouble. "No, Mom, I already told you I'm not discussing this right now. Yes, I know you have visitation rights, but showing up unannounced isn't... No, she's not a stranger. She's a professional hired by my company. Mom, I need to hang up. I have a meeting." Richard ended the call with more force than necessary, his knuckles white from gripping the device so tightly. "Problems?" Sarah asked, though the answer was obvious. "My mom." Richard ran a hand through his hair, the gesture becoming more frequent. "She came back from her time in Paris and is complicated." "Grandma Bea is mad again?" David asked with the keen perception of children who grow up in tense family environments. "She's not mad, son. She worries about you in her own way." Richard pulled his son into a quick hug. "Now go with Aunt Laura to school, okay? You're already late." After David left, not without making Sarah promise there would be more pancakes next week, the silence in the conference room was thick and uncomfortable. "You don't have to explain," Sarah began, gathering the empty coffee cups. "It's not my business." "She doesn't approve of you," Richard said, abruptly, bluntly. "My mom. She called yesterday outraged because she saw you in the photo of the company's quarterly report. She said it's inappropriate to have the maid's daughter in a senior consulting position." Sarah felt the familiar sting of anger and humiliation. "And what did you say?" "I said my business decisions are none of her concern, that you were hired on merit, not connection, that if she has a problem with that, it's her problem, not mine." "That must have been well received," Sarah commented with bitter irony. "She threatened to sue for custody of David." Richard dropped, that like it was just another item on a to-do list, but Sarah saw the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. Arguing that a single father who works 16 hours a day can't provide a suitable structure for a child. Can she do that? Legally? She can try. Grandparents have visitation rights, and in specific cases they can request shared or even full custody, but she'd need to prove severe neglect, and she doesn't have that. Richard finally sat down, suddenly looking exhausted. David has regular psychological support, is doing well in school, is healthy, happy. Any judge would see that. But she's going to try anyway. She will, because that's what she does, tries to control. She's always tried. Richard closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. "She never accepted that Emily and I got married. Emily was from a good family. Yes, but she chose architecture instead of marrying a bank heir like her mother wanted. My mom saw that as weakness, and I built my business from scratch without using family money, and she never forgave me for that." It was the first time Richard had opened up like that, and Sarah felt paralyzed, afraid that any word would break the moment. "After Emily died," Richard continued, his voice lower, "my mum tried to move into the apartment, take over everything, control how I raised David. She said I needed help, that I didn't know how to be a father alone, and she was right about the last part. I didn't know. I still don't." "David adores you," Sarah said softly. "Anyone can see that. David deserves more than a dad who's always absent, always in the office, always cancelling plans because an important meeting came up." Richard opened his eyes, and there was a raw vulnerability there that made Sarah's heart tighten. "You saw how he is with you. In 2 weeks, you've gained more of his trust than I have in months. He talks to you about things he doesn't talk to me. Because I'm not his dad. It's different. Kids test their parents in ways they don't test other people. It's not a lack of love, it's an excess of it. He needs to know you won't abandon him, even when maintaining an appropriate distance but close enough to be comforting. No one knows perfectly how to be a parent, or to be. My mom raised me alone after my dad passed away. There were days she came home from work so exhausted that she could barely make dinner. Days when she cried quietly in the bathroom, thinking I couldn't hear. But you know what I remember when I think of her? I remember that she always showed up for my school performances. She was always there when I needed her. She wasn't perfect, but she was present in the way she could be. And do you think I'm present? I think you're trying, and that's already more than a lot of people do. Raphael's phone vibrated on the table. Another meeting, always another meeting. But for the first time since Sarah had known him, he ignored it. He sat there, looking at his hands, processing. The pilot unit, he finally said, changing the subject, returning to safer ground. The opening is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Are you ready? I am. Equipment arrives next week. The team is already in training, protocols finalized. It's going to work, Raphael. Do you always have this certainty? No, but I've learned to pretend I do until it becomes true. Raphael smiled, a genuine full smile that completely transformed his face. Sarah suddenly realized with a shock that he was handsome, not just generically attractive, but genuinely beautiful when he let his guard down and allowed his humanity to shine through. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For not treating my son like a charity project. For really talking to him. For making him smile the way Emily used to make him smile. The mention of his deceased wife added another layer of complexity to the moment. Sarah didn't know how to respond, so she opted for simple honesty. David is a special boy. Smart, sensitive, brave. Anyone would like him. I'm just lucky that he likes me too. It's not just luck. You have a gift. Raphael stood up, returning to professional mode, the vulnerability tucked away again. By the way, about the opening of the pilot unit, there will be an event for the press, fitness influencers, some athletes who are our clients. I need you to be there, not as a staff member behind the scenes, but as the mind behind the project. I need you to present. Sarah's stomach flipped. In front of the press? In front of everyone. It's your project, Sarah. You deserve the credit. But what about your mother and the people who will say I only got this because of connections? Let them say it. You'll prove them wrong. Not with words, but with results. Raphael extended his hand, formal but with something warmer in his eyes. Are you in? Sarah looked at the outstretched hand, at the complex and wounded man in front of her, at the office where she had spent the last few weeks building something from scratch. She thought of David, the pure trust in the boy's honey-colored eyes. She thought of her mother working in the same apartment where now Sarah was treated as a professional and not as an extension of the nanny. I'm in, she said, shaking his hand. And once again, that electric current. Stronger now, impossible to ignore completely. Raphael's fingers lingered on hers, his thumb tracing an unconscious circle on the back of her hand before they both realized and quickly let go. Great, Raphael said, his voice a tone rougher. So we're going to have a lot of work ahead. I hope you have stamina because I won't go easy. I wouldn't expect anything less, Sarah replied, already gathering her materials. When she left the office that March morning, with the sun finally breaking through the persistent rain outside, Sarah Johnson had no way of knowing that this conversation, this shared vulnerability, that handhold lingering a second longer than necessary, had irrevocably changed the dynamic between them. They were no longer just boss and consultant. It was something deeper, more dangerous. It was genuine partnership, tempered with unacknowledged attraction, mutual admiration mixed with family complications, professional ambition intertwined with emotional connections that neither was prepared to face. And as March moved into April, as the opening date approached and morning meetings became more frequent and intense, both pretended not to notice the obvious. But David noticed. With the keen perception of children yearning for a complete family, he saw the way his father looked at Sarah when she wasn't watching. He saw how Sarah softened when talking about his father, how her eyes sparkled differently when Raphael entered the room, and in his 7-year-old heart, He was already beginning to sketch a future that the adults hadn't dared to imagine. The school international summer festival took place every second Saturday in June, a tradition that the institution maintained despite catering mainly to elite families who spent more time in Miami than in their hometown. The inner courtyard had been transformed into a sanitized and sophisticated version of a traditional summer fair. Polished wooden stalls instead of bamboo, imported fabric bunting instead of crepe paper, and a menu that included organic pancakes and non-alcoholic spiced cider made with de-alcoholized French wine. Sarah received the invitation in an unusual way. David showed up at the office on a Thursday afternoon. She had started working in the afternoons as the pilot. Project took shape, with a pink envelope decorated with drawings of balloons and stars clearly made by him. "This is for you," the boy announced solemnly, pushing the envelope into her hands. "I made it. Well, the teacher helped with the hard letters, but the drawing is mine." Sarah opened the envelope with exaggerated care, as if it were the most precious document in the world. Inside, a printed invitation on cardstock announced the festival, but on the margins and in the spaces. In blank, David had drawn a stick figure that clearly represented her, identifiable by the curly hair he captured with generous spirals of brown crayon, another larger figure that must have been Richard, and a smaller one in the middle, holding the hands of both, all smiling, all under a sky filled with yellow stars. "You need to go," David said, with the seriousness of someone making an important request. "There's going to be a dance, and I'm going to be the groom. But there needs to be family watching, and Dad said he can't go because he has a meeting with Japanese investors." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "David, I would love to go, but I don't know if it's appropriate. I work for your dad. I'm not exactly family." "But I want you to be." The boy's voice rose an octave, his eyes beginning to well up. "Everyone else is going to have their mom and dad watching. I only have Dad, and he can't even go. Grandma Bea said she would, but I don't just want her. She keeps saying I'm fat and that I eat wrong and that I should go live with her. Hey, you're not fat, David. You're perfect just the way you are." Sarah knelt in front of him, wiping away a tear that escaped from the boy's eye. "And no one is going to take you away from your dad, okay? No one. So you will go? Please?" How does someone say no to those honey-colored eyes filled with hope? "I'll talk to your dad first, all right? But I promise I'll try." The conversation with Richard was more complicated than Sarah expected. She found him in his office at 7 in the evening, when most of the team had already left. He was immersed in financial reports, reading glasses perched on his nose, shirt sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. There was something intimately attractive about that controlled disorganization, and Sarah had to force herself to focus on the topic. "About David's school party," she began, still at the door. Richard sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "He invited you, didn't he? I told him not to do that you wouldn't want to spend your Saturday at a kid's party." "Actually, I want to go, if you allow it." Richard looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because he asked me, because it's important to him, and because—" Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Because I like him, Richard, genuinely, not out of professional obligation or to score points with you. He's a special boy and deserves to have people cheering for him." "My mom will be there," Richard warned, his voice laden with tension. "She confirmed yesterday, and she won't be nice to you. I can handle hostility. I've spent my whole life hearing people say I wouldn't make it because I was the daughter of a housekeeper, because I came from the countryside, because I didn't have the right connections. An irritable grandmother isn't going to scare me." Richard stood up, walking around the desk to get closer to her. "It's not just that she's irritable, Sarah. My mom can be cruel when she wants to. She will evaluate you, judge you, try to belittle you, and I don't—" He paused, running his hand through his hair in that already familiar gesture. "I don't want you to go through that because of David, or because of me." "And the meeting with the Japanese investors?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. "Are you really going to miss your son's party because of that?" "It's not missing, it's a strategic decision. This negotiation could mean international expansion. For Vitra, it could—" "Richard," Sarah interrupted him, placing her hand on his arm without thinking. The contact froze them for a second. "David is 7 years old. In 10 years he won't remember the international expansion of the company, but he will remember if his dad was there at the school dance." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard looked at Sarah's hand on his arm, then back at her face, and something changed in his expression. A decision being made, a wall being torn down. "You're right," he finally said. "I'll reschedule the meeting, and I'll go to the party." "Really? Really? But—" he smiled slightly, a smile that had more tension than joy. "If I'm going to face my mom, you are too. We're going together." Together. As business partners who care about the well-being of the boss's son. Nothing more. But the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on hers, suggested layers of meaning that neither of them was willing to acknowledge. The party Saturday dawned with that impossible blue sky that only New York can have after days of rain. Sarah spent 2 hours deciding what to wear. It couldn't be too formal, but it also couldn't be too casual. She ended up choosing a navy blue cotton midi dress with white polka dots, comfortable low sandals, and her curly hair loose on her shoulders. Simple, but appropriate. Mrs. Johnson watched her daughter get ready with a worried expression. "Are you sure about this, Sarah? Going to a school party with him? People are going to start talking." "They're probably already talking, Mom," Sarah replied, applying a discreet nude lipstick. "And it doesn't matter. I'm going because David invited me, not because I'm trying to impress anyone." "And Dr. Richard, is he really going?" "He is. He rescheduled the meeting for Monday." Mrs. Johnson sat on her daughter's bed, her hands clasped in her lap. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Sarah stopped getting ready, sensing her mother's serious tone. "Go ahead. Are you falling in love with him?" The silence was too long to be a convincing denial. Sarah finally sighed, sitting next to her mother. "I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. Some days I think it's just professional admiration. Some days—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Some days he looks at me in a way that makes me forget how to breathe, but it might just be in my head. Maybe I'm confusing a work partnership with something more. And what if it's not confusion? What if it's real? That's too complicated to think about. He's my boss, Mom, and he's a widower, and he has a son, and a mother who hates me, and I'm me. You are a beautiful, intelligent, hard-working woman with a huge heart," Mrs. Johnson said firmly, holding her daughter's face in her hands. "Don't let anyone, ever, make you believe you're less than that. Not Dr. Emily, not anyone." Richard picked up Sarah at 2 in the afternoon, driving himself instead of sending the driver, a choice that didn't go unnoticed. He was more casual than she had ever seen him. Dark jeans, a white polo shirt, sneakers. Without the executive uniform, he looked younger, more approachable, and dangerously more attractive. "You look beautiful," he said when she got into the car, then seemed to regret the spontaneity of the compliment. "I mean, appropriate for a square dance. You're appropriately dressed." Sarah hid her smile. "Thank you. You look appropriate too." The drive to the school was filled with conversation about the pilot project, safe ground, professional. The Central Park Towers location had opened the previous week, with results exceeding expectations. 37 complete assessments sold on the first day, a waiting list formed for the second week. The specialized press had covered it positively, highlighting the innovation of the approach. "Did you see that Fitness magazine wants to do a full feature?" Richard commented while navigating through Saturday afternoon traffic. 3 pages, an interview with you, photos of the location. "I saw, but I thought it would be better for you to approve it before I confirm." "Sarah, you don't need my approval to talk to the press. It's your project, your face that will be in the article. You decide." "But it affects your company, your reputation." "Our company," Richard gently corrected. "You're an integral part of it now. Stop acting like a temporary consultant. You're in." The word "in" carried a weight that went beyond the professional, but neither of them commented. The International School of New York occupied a huge plot of land, with sports courts, a theater, and laboratories that would make universities envious. The parking lot was already filled with imported SUVs and luxury sedans. Sarah felt her stomach tighten upon seeing the caliber of the families studying there. This was a completely different world from hers. "Hey," Richard touched her arm gently when he noticed her hesitation. "Breathe. It's just a school party. Rich people also burn popcorn and mess up fishing games." Sarah laughed despite her nerves. "You're bad at giving motivational pep talks. I know, but it's true. Besides, you're literally the most qualified person here to talk about nutrition. Half of these parents probably feed their kids processed nuggets and soda. That's nutritional elitism, and you know it. It's data-based observation. Come on, David must be looking for us." The yard was unrecognizable, transformed into an elaborate fair too extravagant to be authentic, but charming in its own way. Booths offered everything: fishing games with plastic fish in a lit aquarium, ring toss with empty wine bottles, a greeting card booth, a clown's mouth, and a candy stall. In the center, a decorated stage awaited the square dance performance. "Dad! Sarah!" David came running, dressed in a tiny country groom outfit. Plaid pants, suspenders, a white shirt, and a straw hat. He looked so adorable that Sarah felt her eyes sting. "You look great, champ," Richard said, kneeling to adjust his son's crooked hat. "I'm nervous," David confessed. "Emily is my bride in the square dance, and she said I step on her foot." "You'll do great," Sarah assured him. "And if you step on her foot, just apologize and keep dancing. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes." "Richard, Sarah." The voice came from behind them, cold as ice. "What a surprise to see you together." Sarah turned and encountered Beatrice Miller for the first time. The woman was exactly as she had imagined. Tall, slender, with a ballerina's posture, grey hair cut in a flawless bob, dressed in a beige linen suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. She had the same brown eyes as Richard, but where his carried warmth hidden beneath layers of control, hers were simply calculating. "Mother," Richard stood, subtly placing himself between Sarah and Beatrice. "I'm glad you could come. David, go greet your grandma." "Hi, Grandma Bea," David murmured unenthusiastically, allowing his grandmother to kiss his cheek but not returning the hug. "You've grown," Beatrice commented, critically assessing her grandson. "And you're heavier. Richard, are you feeding him properly?" "David is perfectly healthy," Richard replied, the tension visible in his shoulders. "And he's under professional nutritional supervision." "Oh, yes." Beatrice finally turned her full attention to Sarah, her eyes making a slow and deliberately insulting scan from top to bottom. "You must be Mrs. Johnson's daughter. Nutritionist, right? How convenient." "Sarah Johnson." Sarah extended her hand, keeping her voice steady despite the discomfort. "And yes, I'm a nutritionist. responsible for the new sports nutrition program at Fit Life Gym. Beatrice shook her hand with 2 fingers, as if fearing contamination. Fascinating. And tell me, which university did you graduate from again? Not one of the traditional ones, I imagine. New York University, Sarah replied, refusing to be belittled. On a full merit scholarship, first in my class, and I did all my internships at New York Medical Center. How admirable! Hard work is always admirable. The tone made it clear that Beatrice didn't find it admirable at all. Still, it must be difficult to navigate professional circles without the right connections. But I suppose working for Richard solves that problem, doesn't it? I don't work for him. For connections, Sarah Richard retorted, feeling his anger begin to boil. I work because I have the skills to be here. Of course, of course. And the fact that your mother has worked in his apartment for 15 years has nothing to do with it. Mum, enough! Richard's voice was dangerously low. You will not disrespect Sarah, not here, not anywhere. Disrespect? I'm just making an observation. David, stop! David interrupted, surprising everyone. The boy had his fists clenched, his eyes shining with held-back tears. Stop being mean to Sarah. She's nice. She teaches me things. She doesn't call me. That like you do? The silence that followed was absolute. Nearby parents stopped talking, turning to watch the drama unfold. Beatrice was pale, her mouth agape in shock. Richard looked torn between pride for his son and horror at the public scene. David, come here, Sarah said softly, extending her hand. The boy immediately took it, hiding his face in her skirt. Let's take a walk. Check out the booths, okay? Let the adults talk. She led David away before anyone could protest, feeling the stares burning into her back. They found a quieter corner near the fishing booth, where Sarah knelt in front of the boy. Hey, look at me. She gently lifted his chin. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? You defended someone who was being treated unfairly. That's brave. But I yelled at Grandma, David sobbed, and Dad said kids shouldn't yell at adults. Your dad also said your grandma was wrong. Sometimes even adults need to be corrected, and you did that. Sarah wiped his tears with her thumb. Now breathe deeply with me, in through your nose, hold out through your mouth. That's it, again. They did the breathing exercise 3 times until David calmed down. A teacher came to inform him that the square dance would start in 10 minutes, and the boy looked at Sarah with renewed panic. What if I mess everything up because I'm nervous? You won't mess up, but do you know what we're going to do? Sarah took a simple fabric bracelet she wore on her wrist, a memento with no monetary value that she bought at a craft fair. This is my lucky bracelet. When I was nervous before my thesis defense, I wore it. It gave me all the courage. Now I'm lending it to you, and it will give you courage too. David accepted the bracelet as if it were a sacred talisman, carefully tying it around his wrist. Will you be watching? Front row, I promise. When they returned to the central courtyard, Richard was alone, standing in a corner with a tense expression. Beatrice had disappeared. Did your mother leave? Sarah asked. She did, after telling me exactly what she thinks about you, about my choices, about how I'm failing as a dad. Richard ran his hand aggressively through his hair. Sarah, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. You don't need to apologize for... You can't control what she does. But I should have warned you better. I should have predicted she would make a scene. Richard, look at me. Sarah waited until he actually looked. I've been through worse things. Your mother is elitist and prejudiced, yes, but I won't let that define me, and you shouldn't feel guilty for her choices. She threatened to intensify the custody process. She said she would use you as proof that I'm exposing David to inappropriate influences. Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. Then maybe it's better if I step back. No! Richard held her arm, firm but gentle. No, I'm not going to let her dictate who can or cannot be in my son's life. David likes you. You're good for him. That's what matters. But if it complicates the legal process, then let it complicate. Any judge will see that David is healthy, happy, well cared for, he has psychological support, is doing well in school, has a stable life. My mother may have money to pay for expensive lawyers, but she doesn't have real arguments. The music began to play on stage, an instrumental version of Look at the Sky. The children began to line up for the square dance, David anxiously searching for Sarah in the audience. When he saw her, he waved exaggeratedly, showing the bracelet on his wrist. Richard and Sarah found seats in the front row. Wealthy families settled around them. Parents filming with the latest smartphones, grandparents taking pictures with professional cameras. Sarah felt out of place again, but then Richard discreetly intertwined his fingers with hers under the table, and suddenly the rest of the world didn't matter anymore. The square dance was adorable and chaotic in the way only 7-year-old performances can be. David did step on his partner's foot twice, but he also remembered all the steps, laughed when he made mistakes, and waved to Sarah and his dad every time he passed in front of them. When it ended, he was radiant, puffed up with pride and effort. "I did it! I did it without crying and without giving up," he shouted, running to the two. Richard picked him up, something he probably hadn't done in a long time given the surprise on David's face. "You were amazing, son. Dad is so proud." "And is Sarah proud too?" David asked, looking at her over his dad's shoulder. "Very proud," Sarah confirmed, blinking to hide the sudden tears. "You were the best country groom ever." They spent the next hour circling the booths. Richard won a ridiculously large stuffed bear at the ring toss booth after 10 frustrating attempts that made Sarah laugh until her stomach hurt. David ate popcorn, cotton candy, and a piece of cornbread cake, under the watchful but permissive eye of Sarah, who explained to Richard that festive days had different nutritional rules. They took pictures together, first just Richard and David. Then David insisted that Sarah join in, and then the school, and photographer. They caught them in a casual moment, Richard saying something that made Sarah laugh, David in the middle of the two holding popcorn, the three looking exactly like what they were not, a family. When the sun began to set and the decorative lights turned on, transforming the yard into something magical, the smell of mulled wine and corn pudding filled the air. A live band started playing country music, and couples began to dance. "Sarah, dance with me!" David pulled her hand. "I don't know how to dance country very well," she warned. "Neither do I. Let's mess up together." They fell into the dance with uncoordinated enthusiasm, David stepping on her feet as much as she stepped on his, both laughing too much to care. Richard watched from a nearby bench, an expression on his face that he could no longer hide. Admiration mixed with something deeper, something more frightening. Desire, not just physical, but emotional. The desire for that scene to be real, for that woman dancing with his son, laughing without pretensions, being natural and warm and perfectly imperfect, to be a permanent part of their lives. When the music changed to something slower, Sarah returned to the bench, her face flushed from effort, and David was drawn away by classmates for one last round of games before the end. "You're good with him," Richard said softly. "It's not just patience or training. You genuinely care." "How could I not care? He's amazing." Sarah took a sip of the water Richard offered her. "Smart, sensitive, brave. You're doing a great job raising him." "I don't feel like I am. Most days I feel like I'm failing spectacularly." "Welcome to parenthood. My mom once told me that if you don't spend at least 40% of the time feeling like you're failing, you're probably really failing, because parents who care question their choices. Bad parents don't care enough to question." Richard laughed, a genuine and warm sound. "Your mom is wise." "She is. Even working too much, earning too little, making all kinds of sacrifices, she always knew what mattered. And what mattered was me knowing I was loved. David knows that. He doesn't doubt." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the children play under the colorful lights. It was one of those moments suspended in time, where everything feels perfectly aligned, where happiness is palpable and frightening at the same time because you know it's fragile. "Sarah," Richard began, his voice hesitant in a way she had never heard before, "I need to tell you something and I'm not sure how, so I'll be direct." Sarah's heart raced. "Okay. He paused, visibly struggling with the words. "I like you. Not just as a professional, not just as someone who is good for David. I like you. And I know it's complicated, and I know I'm technically your boss, and I know my mum will make this hell, but I needed you to know that, Dad, Sarah, look." David came running back with a plastic bag full of candies he won from a fishing game. "I won! Look how many!" The moment broke. Richard closed his mouth, the unfinished confession hanging in the air between them. Sarah wanted to scream in frustration and relief at the same time, but David was there, radiant and innocent, and she could do nothing but smile and marvel at the amount of candy. When he took Sarah home later that night, David, already asleep in the back seat, exhausted and happy, neither mentioned the interrupted conversation, but when Richard stopped in front of her building on the Upper West Side, he held her hand before she could get out. "We need to finish this conversation," he said. "It needs to be finished." "I know," Sarah replied, squeezing his fingers briefly before getting out of the car. And as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, her dress smelling of popcorn and barbecue smoke, with her heart racing and her mind in turmoil, Sarah knew something fundamental had changed. There was no longer any way to pretend that what she felt was just professional admiration. There was no longer any way to ignore that Richard felt the same, and that made everything infinitely more complicated and infinitely more frighteningly real. April bled into May in a succession of days that felt simultaneously too fast and too slow. The pilot unit in Central Park Towers continued to exceed expectations. 83 complete evaluations in the first month, a satisfaction rate of 92%, 3 articles in specialized magazines. The numbers justified the expansion of the program to other units, and Richard had already approved the budget for implementation in 4 more gyms by the end of the year. But the numbers, impressive as they were, did not fully occupy Sarah's mind. Not when every morning meeting with Richard was charged with unresolved tension. Not when every shared coffee came with glances that lasted seconds longer than appropriate. Not when the interrupted conversation at the summer festival hung between them like an invisible but palpable third presence. Mrs. Johnson noticed the change in her daughter. Sarah was more distracted, more restless, spending hours looking at her phone waiting for messages that came with increasing frequency. Richard sending articles about sports nutrition. David sending awkward voice, notes about his day at school, sometimes just a good morning at 6 in the morning that made Sarah's heart race ridiculously. "You need to decide what you want, dear," Mrs. Johnson said one Monday morning as they prepared coffee together before heading to work. "Staying in this uncertainty is not good for anyone." "It's not that simple, Mom," Sarah replied, stirring the sugar into her coffee with more force than necessary. "He's technically my boss. He has a son. He's still processing his wife's death. His mother hates me, and I—" She paused. Sarah paused, confronting for the first time out loud what she felt. "And I'm afraid that in the end, I'll just be convenient. The woman who takes good care of his son, who doesn't ask for much, who fits perfectly into his life without causing waves." "Sarah Johnson, do you really think that?" Mrs. Johnson put down her cup, turning to face her daughter. Do you think that man sees you as convenient? I see how he is when you arrive. I hear how his voice changes when he talks about you to David. That's not convenience, sweetheart. That's a man scared because he's feeling something real for the first time in 3 years. What if he's confusing gratitude with something more? And what if, and what if, and what if, and what if? Mrs. Johnson shook her head. You can spend your whole life protecting yourself from possible hurts, or you can have the courage to live fully. Your father, may he rest in peace, always said, Celia, a life lived in fear is not a life, it's just waiting. Don't wait, Sarah. Live. The official proposal arrived on a Thursday in May, but not in the way Sarah expected. Richard scheduled a formal meeting at his office with the presence of the legal and HR departments. Sarah felt her stomach churn. Meetings with legal rarely meant good things. Sarah, thank you for coming, Richard began, his posture formal, professional. 2 company lawyers were seated at the oval table, documents piled in front of them. We need to formalize your position at FitLife. Formalize. Sarah sat down, confused. The external consulting period ends this month, the older lawyer explained, pushing a thick folder across the table. Dr. Miller is offering a permanent position as Director of Nutrition and Innovation at FitLife Gym. Base salary of $28,000 a month, full benefits including a premium health plan, profit sharing, and a stock package that vests in 3 years. Sarah blinked, processing the numbers. $28,000. She was currently earning $5,000 as a consultant. This was more than 5 times what she earned, more than she ever dreamed of making so early in her career. Is this for real? She asked, looking at Richard. Completely real, he replied, but his expression was carefully neutral, professional. You've built something exceptional, Sarah. The program is yours. The methodology is yours. The results are yours. You deserve a position and compensation that reflect that. But there's a condition, the younger lawyer interjected, opening another document. Given the nature of your relationship with the CEO and his complex family situation, we need you to sign a very specific professional conduct agreement. Sarah's stomach dropped. What kind of agreement? Nothing too restrictive, the lawyer assured, just establishing clear boundaries between professional and personal life. You will continue to work directly with Dr. Miller on business matters, but any interaction outside of the professional context needs to be documented and transparent, especially considering the ongoing custody process. Sarah looked at Richard, searching for any hint in his expression. He kept his face carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps. Frustration. Was this your idea? She asked directly. It was the lawyer's idea, Richard replied, but his voice had a tension that Sarah had learned to recognize. But I agreed. Sarah, my mother is intensifying the process. She hired a private investigator, documenting every interaction between us, looking for anything she can use as evidence of neglect or inappropriate behavior. If we're going to continue working together, and I need you to continue, both professionally and... He paused, choosing his words carefully under the lawyer's watchful eyes. For other reasons, we need to do this in a way that protects you, protects David, and doesn't give her ammunition. So you're offering me an amazing position, while at the same time asking me to sign a contract that essentially prohibits anything beyond a professional relationship. Sarah felt anger beginning to bubble. Do you realize how contradictory that is? It doesn't prohibit, the older lawyer corrected. It just establishes protocols. If you develop a personal relationship, it needs to be disclosed to HR. It needs to follow the company's anti-nepotism policies, and it needs to be conducted with complete transparency to avoid accusations of conflict of interest. Complete transparency, Sarah repeated, her tone heavy with sarcasm, including reports about dinners, about casual conversations, about when David texts me about dinosaurs. Sarah, Richard began, but she interrupted him. No, let me understand completely. You want me to accept this position, which, yes, is amazing, and yes, I'd probably be crazy to refuse, but it comes with the condition that any personal connection we've developed needs to be treated as an HR issue, as something that needs to be managed, documented, controlled. It's not about controlling, Richard said, finally showing frustration. It's about protecting. My mother will use anything she can against me. If she can prove that I'm neglecting David in favor of an inappropriate relationship with an employee. Inappropriate. Sarah stood up, the folder with the contract still closed. Is that how you see it? As something inappropriate? No! Damn it, no! Richard ran his hands through his hair aggressively. You know that's not it. Dr. Miller, perhaps it's best to give Mrs. Johnson some time to review the documents calmly, the lawyer diplomatically suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the rising tension in the room. I don't need to, Sarah said, her voice colder now, more controlled. I will review the contract. I will consult my own lawyer if necessary, and I will give a response by the end of the week. But I need it to be clear. I will not sign anything that turns me into a problem to be managed. I work too hard. I've sacrificed too much. I've achieved too much to be reduced to this. She left the room without waiting for a response, ignoring Richard calling her name. Her footsteps echoed furiously down the marble corridor as she marched away. As she stepped into the elevator, it was only when the doors closed and she was alone in the small mirrored space that she allowed the tears to come, tears of anger, humiliation, and frustration, with a situation that seemed to have no right outcome. Mrs. Johnson was preparing lunch in Richard's apartment when Sarah arrived, 2 hours earlier than usual. Her mother was startled to see her daughter enter through the service door, something Sarah swore she would never do, but did automatically, in her emotional state. Sarah, what happened? Mrs. Johnson dropped the wooden spoon, wiping her hands on her apron. He offered me a promotion, Sarah said, throwing her bag onto the small sofa in the maid's room where Mrs. Johnson spent her afternoons. Nutrition director, $28,000 a month, company stock. But that's wonderful. Why are you crying? Because it comes with a contract that basically says I can't have anything personal with him without it becoming an HR issue. Because his mother is suing for custody of David, and anything between us could be used against him. Because Sarah finally broke down on the sofa, hiding her face in her hands. Because I fell in love with him, Mom. For real. It's not just attraction or professional admiration. I fell in love with the complicated, controlling, impossible man who has the courage to go against his own mother to defend what he believes in, who loves his son with an intensity that hurts to see, who looks at me as if I mattered, for real. Mrs. Johnson sat down next to her daughter, pulling her into a tight embrace. And you think he doesn't feel the same? I don't know. He wanted to tell me something at David's party, but he didn't finish, and now this. How will I know if what he feels is real, or if it's just gratitude, or worse, if it's real but he won't choose it because it's too complicated? My daughter, look at me! Mrs. Johnson held Sarah's face between her hands. That man is in love with you. I see it every day, in the way he asks about you when you're not here, how his mood improves when you're about to arrive, how he talks about you to David. But he's scared. Scared of losing his son, scared of ruining his career, scared of not being good enough after so long alone. So, what do I do? You decide if it's worth fighting for. If the problems, the complications, the difficult mother-in-law, the HR contracts, everything is worth it. Because true love, my daughter, is never easy, especially when it has real value. Your father and I fought against so much. The family didn't accept that he married a poor girl from the countryside. We had nothing when we started, but it was worth every second. Every difficulty was worth it because the love was real. Sarah wiped her tears, taking a deep breath. I'm so scared of getting hurt, Mom. I know, but you know what's worse than getting hurt? It's regretting never having tried. A sound at the door interrupted them. Richard was there, standing in the hallway that led to the service rooms, clearly uncomfortable intruding into a space that was Mrs. Johnson's exclusive territory. Sorry to interrupt, he said, looking first at Mrs. Johnson, then at Sarah. Celia, can you give me a minute with Sarah? Of course, Dr. Richard. Mrs. Johnson squeezed her daughter's shoulder encouragingly before leaving, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was heavy with everything that had gone unsaid in recent weeks. Richard leaned against the wall opposite the sofa where Sarah was sitting, keeping a physical distance but with his eyes fixed on her. I messed everything up, he began. The meeting, the way I presented. I tried to do the right thing, the safe thing, and ended up making you feel like a problem. And you're not. You never were. Richard. No, let me finish, please. He ran his hand through his hair, that gesture she knew so well. When Emily died, I completely shut down. I worked 18 hours a day because it was easier than going home to an empty house. I outsourced fatherhood to nannies and your mother because I didn't know how to be a dad alone. I built walls so high around me that I thought I would never feel anything again except obligation and exhaustion. Sarah remained silent, barely breathing. And then you showed up, Richard continued, his voice growing hoarse, with your impossibly good project, your confidence that wasn't arrogance but genuine conviction. Your way with David. That was so natural it made me realize how much I was failing, and little by little, coffee by coffee, meeting by meeting, you were breaking down those walls, making me feel again, making me want again. Want what? Sarah asked softly. You, us, a life that isn't just work and obligations, a possibility of family again, not to replace what I lost, but to build something new. He finally moved closer, kneeling in front of her. Sarah, I messed up how to say it, but what I tried to do today was protect you. My mother is relentless. She will use anything she can to try to prove that I'm not fit to raise David alone. If she finds out I'm involved with an employee, she'll twist it, make it seem like I'm being manipulated, that you're taking advantage. And do you think I care what she thinks? I care about what could happen to you because of her. You worked your whole life to build your professional reputation. I won't let her destroy that. Sarah held his face. Richard held Marina's hands, forcing him to look directly at her. Richard Miller, listen to me well. I am not fragile. I am not delicate. I grew up facing people who thought I wasn't good enough because of where I came from, who my mother is, how little money I had. Your mother will not break me. What can break me is you not having the courage to admit what you feel. I'm scared, he admitted, and there was a raw vulnerability in that confession that made Marina's heart tighten. Scared of not being good enough for you, scared that you might realize you can do better, scared of dragging you into the chaos that is my life and you regretting it. And there lies the difference between us, Marina said softly. You're afraid of not being good enough. I've already decided that you are. You just need to decide if you will believe that too. Richard kissed her then, and it was not gentle or hesitant. It was desperate, hungry, 3 months of unresolved tension exploding in a moment. His hands were in her hair, pulling her closer, and her hands clutched his shirt as if he would disappear if she let go. When they finally separated, both were breathless. I don't want you to sign that contract, Richard said against her lips. Not the way it is. I will have the lawyers rewrite it, something that legally protects you without treating our relationship as a corporate issue. Our relationship, Marina repeated, a smile trying to form. So we have a relationship. If you want, if you're willing to face everything that comes with it, my mother, the lawsuit, the complications, David in the middle of it all. David is not a complication. David is the best part of all this. He adores you, talks about you all the time. Marina said this. Marina taught that. You've become his reference. And does that scare you? It terrifies me. It terrifies me to realize that in 3 months you've done more for my son than I managed in 3 years. Not because you tried to replace his mother, but because you were genuine. You truly cared. Marina kissed him again, softer this time. I care about him, and I care about you, even though you can be controlling, perfectionistic, and impossible at times. Impossible? Richard raised an eyebrow, but there was humor in his eyes now. You spent 40 minutes deciding between 2 almost identical shades of blue for the nutritionist's uniforms. Details matter. You need to learn to delegate. I'm learning. You force me to learn. He became serious again. Marina, I can't promise it will be easy. My mother will fight this with everything she has. The custody process will drag on. There will be people talking, judging. I know, and I still want to try. Even if it means waiting. Because while the legal process is ongoing, we need to be careful. We can't give her ammunition. What are you saying? That I want you in my life, officially, completely, but maybe we need to take it slow, keep this discreet until the legal situation resolves. It's not what I want, but it's what's safest for David. Marina nodded, understanding even though it hurt. Then let's take it slow. But Richard, I'm going to accept that promotion. Not for you, but because I deserve it, and we'll rewrite that contract together, something that protects both of us without diminishing us. I agree. He stood up, pulling her along. And one last thing. What? I love you. He said it straightforwardly, without preamble, as if announcing an undeniable fact. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I need you to know. I love you. Not because you're convenient or because you're good with David, but because you are you, annoying, stubborn, brilliant, impossible you. Marina felt the tears return, but this time they were good. I love you too, even though you can be controlling and perfectionistic and impossible, I know. He smiled, that full smile that transformed his face. You've said that already. Just checking if you were paying attention. They sealed the agreement with another kiss, slower this time, savoring the certainty that they were finally on the same page. When they finally separated, Marina had a question. And now? How do we make this work? 1 day at a time, Richard replied. Professional meetings at the office, discreet dinners when possible, long phone calls after David goes to sleep. And when the legal process is over, because it will end, my mother has no real arguments, then yes, officially, without hiding, without HR protocols, just us. Us, Marina repeated, liking the sound of the word. I can live with that. But as Richard returned to work and Marina finally focused on the revised contract documents, neither of them could know how difficult that promise to take it slow would be to keep. Not when Beatrice Miller was just beginning her campaign to destroy any possibility of happiness for her son. Not when May was about to bring complications that would test not only their relationship but the very structure of everything they had built. May brought torrential rains that turned New York into a maze of flooded streets and chaotic traffic. But the real storm was brewing at Miller & Associates, where Beatrice Miller met weekly with a team of 3 family law attorneys, determined to prove that her son was incapable of raising David properly. Marina learned this through Mrs. Johnson, who overheard phone conversations while cleaning the apartment. "She hired a private investigator, dear," Mrs. Johnson whispered one Tuesday morning as they had coffee before work. "I heard her talking to someone about documenting all inappropriate interactions. She knows about you and Dr. Richard." "How could she know? We've been so careful." Marina felt her stomach churn. "Investigator, dear. They have photos of you two leaving that restaurant." Sarah was at the Central Park Towers supervising a training session when she received the call from Richard. His voice was too controlled, which always meant he was on the verge of exploding. "I need you to come to the office, now." "What happened?" "My mother filed for emergency custody, claiming severe neglect and exposing David to an inappropriate environment." Sarah felt the world spin. Based on what? On the photos, on the supposed witnesses she bought, and on an accusation that you are living in my apartment unofficially, exposing David to an inappropriate adult relationship. His voice cracked on the last word. "Sarah, she's trying to paint you as some kind of opportunist who took advantage of my mother's position to enter my life and David's. I'm on my way now." The office was in a state of emergency when Sarah arrived. 4 lawyers, the HR team from FitLife Gym, and Richard at the center of it all, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. There were documents scattered across the conference table, enlarged photos of Sarah and Richard at restaurants, entering and exiting her apartment building. One particularly invasive shot of Richard kissing Sarah on the forehead before she got out of the car. "This is absurd," Sarah said, grabbing the photos with trembling hands. "We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't sleep together. We don't live together. I've never behaved inappropriately around David." "Legally, that doesn't matter," the senior lawyer explained, her voice tired. "What matters is the perception. Beatrice is arguing that Richard is prioritizing a new and secret relationship over his son's well-being, that he is exposing David to an unstable female figure too soon, that there is a conflict of professional interest, and that," she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, "that you, Sarah, are taking advantage of Richard's vulnerable position as a widower and your own position as the daughter of the nanny to gain access to a lifestyle you wouldn't have otherwise." Sarah felt as if she had been slapped. "Opportunist! She's calling me a gold digger." "She doesn't use those exact terms, but the implication is clear," the older lawyer confirmed, "and she has statements from some people in the apartment complex, staff, who confirm that you visit the apartment frequently, sometimes staying late, that David is very attached to you in a way they consider concerning." "Concerning?" Richard exploded. "My son finally having someone besides me who genuinely cares for him is concerning." "For your mother's argument, yes," the lawyer replied. "She's painting this as you prematurely replacing his mother, confusing the boy, not giving him adequate time to process the loss before introducing a new maternal figure." "I'm not trying to replace anyone." Sarah felt the tears of anger burning. I care about him, genuinely. Is that a crime?" "No, but it can be used against you in a custody case." The lawyer opened another document. "The preliminary hearing is next week. The judge will want to hear both sides, possibly want to speak with David in a controlled environment, maybe order a psychological evaluation of the family." "A psychological evaluation?" Richard ran his hands over his face. "As if I'm some kind of danger to my own son?" "It's standard procedure in custody disputes, especially when there are serious allegations." The lawyer paused. "Dr. Miller, I need to ask a difficult question. Are you willing to temporarily end your relationship with Sarah until this legal situation is resolved?" The silence that followed was as thick as concrete. Sarah looked at Richard, seeing the agony on his face, the impossible choice he was being forced to make. "No," Richard finally said, his voice firm despite the visible pain. I'm not going to do that. I won't let my mother dictate who can or cannot be in my life, and I won't lie to David saying that Sarah just disappeared because Grandma said so. Then we need a different strategy, the senior lawyer said, already taking notes. We need to document everything that proves David is well cared for, happy, healthy. Reports from school, from the child psychologist, testimonies from teachers, doctors, and we need to deconstruct the narrative. Marina is a negative influence. We need testimonies about her professional character, her appropriate relationship with David, evidence that she is not taking advantage of anything. I have all my professional records, Sarah offered, her voice firmer now. Degrees, certifications, published articles, the employment contract that shows I was hired based on merit. I can request letters of recommendation from my college professors, from the supervisors during my internship at the New York Medical Center. That helps. We also need testimonies about your behavior with David. Teachers who saw you together, other parents who observed the interactions. The school principal, Richard reminded. She mentioned to me that David has improved a lot since Sarah entered his life. Less anxious, more communicative, better grades. Great. We will need her as a witness. The lawyer made more notes. And Celia, Sarah's mother, did Beatrice try to bribe her? She did, Mrs. Johnson said from the doorway. No one had noticed when she entered, but there she was, still in uniform, standing tall despite her visible exhaustion. She offered me $50,000 to lie about Dr. Richard and my daughter. I refused, and she threatened me. Attempted bribery and witness intimidation, the older lawyer said, finally showing some enthusiasm. This is serious. Are you willing to testify about this? I am willing to tell the truth about everything, Mrs. Johnson declared. About how Dr. Richard is a present father, even while working a lot. About how David was before and after Sarah entered their lives. About how my daughter never ever behaved inappropriately or selfishly, and about how Dr. Beatrice tried to buy me. The week leading up to the hearing was the hardest Sarah had ever experienced. She couldn't see David. The lawyers advised that any contact would be used against them. The boy called every day, confused about why Sarah was no longer around, why his dad was always tense, why Grandma Bea was suddenly visiting so much. Did I do something wrong? David asked during a particularly painful call one Wednesday night. Sarah was at home, lying in the dark, the phone pressed against her ear as if she could hug the boy through it. No, champ, you didn't do anything wrong, she assured, her voice choked with emotion. The adults are just sorting out some boring adult stuff, but I promise that as soon as I can, we'll have that special hot chocolate again. Grandma Bea said you left because you didn't really like me, David sobbed on the other end of the line. She said you were just pretending to like me because my dad was paying you. Sarah felt such intense anger that she had to bite her lip to avoid cursing. David, listen to me carefully. I really like you. Not because someone pays me, not because I have to, but because you are special, you are smart, you are brave, and it's impossible not to like you. Grandma is wrong, and she knows she's wrong. Then why don't you come here anymore? Because sometimes, when adults are fighting among themselves, they unintentionally make kids get caught in the middle, and your dad and I are trying to protect you from that. I don't want to be protected. I want you to come back. I will come back, I promise. You just need to have a little more patience with us. After they hung up, Sarah cried for 20 minutes straight, then forced herself to get up and review, for the 10th time, all the documents she would take to the hearing. She didn't have the right to fall apart. There was too much at stake. Richard was not doing any better. Mrs. Johnson reported to Sarah that he was barely sleeping, working until 3 or 4 in the morning, surviving on coffee and sheer determination. David noticed, becoming more anxious, which in turn made Richard feel more guilty, creating a vicious cycle. I need to see you, Richard texted one Thursday night, the eve of the hearing. Just a few minutes, please. They met at a 24-hour cafe in the Upper West Side, away from their usual spots, away from eyes that might recognize them. Richard looked devastated, unshaven, deep circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt. Sarah had never seen him so broken. "I'm going to give up," he said as soon as they sat down, not even waiting for the coffee to arrive. "On the relationship. I'll tell the lawyers it was just professional, that my mom misunderstood, that we'll keep an appropriate distance. Anything to make her back off." "No." Sarah held his hands on the table, squeezing tightly. "You're not going to do that. Sarah, I can't risk losing David. He's everything. I love you, but he's my son." "And that's exactly why you're not going to give in," Sarah interrupted. "Richard, if you let your mum control this now, she will control everything for the rest of your life. She will control who you date, who you marry, how you raise David. She will use this victory as a precedent every time you do something she doesn't approve of. But the risk is real, I know. But you know what's bigger than the risk, the example you will set for David." Sarah waited until he looked directly at her. "Do you want your son to grow up thinking that love is something you give up on at the first difficulty, that you let other people decide your happiness? Or do you want him to learn that sometimes you have to fight for what matters, even when it's hard, even when it's scary? And if we lose, then we appeal, and appeal again, and again, until a sensible judge looks at the real facts. You are a good father. David is a happy and well-cared-for child, and I'm not a threat to anyone. The truth will prevail, Richard. You just need the courage to get there." Richard pulled her hands to his lips, kissing her fingertips. "I don't deserve you. You deserve someone who fights. In your way, how you fight for others. And guess what? I am that person." They stayed there until the cafe closed, hands intertwined, sharing a silence that spoke more than words could. And when they finally parted, Richard for a sleepless night reviewing documents, Sarah for a sleepless night praying for strengths she wasn't even sure she believed in, both carried a small but powerful certainty. No matter what happened in the hearing tomorrow, they would face it together. The morning of the hearing dawned grey and cold. Sarah wore her only serious suit. Black, conservative, bought on, sale but of good quality. Mrs. Johnson helped with her hair, pinning the curls into a sleek, low bun. There was no heavy makeup, no jewelry, just the appearance of a serious, competent, respectable professional. The family court was located in the central area, an old building with echoing hallways and rooms that smelled of process and anxiety. Sarah arrived half an hour early, finding Richard and his team of lawyers already settled in a waiting room. "You look beautiful," Richard said softly as she approached. "And ready? Ready as I can be to have my entire life dissected. By strangers," Sarah tried to joke, but her voice came out tense. "Mrs. Johnson," the senior lawyer called. "A few last-minute instructions. Answer only what is asked. Don't let them provoke you. Be factual, not emotional. And remember, you are not being judged as a person. You are being evaluated as an influence in a child's life." "Okay. Factual, not emotional." Sarah took a deep breath. "I can do this." But when the doors opened and she saw Beatrice Miller on the other side of the room, impeccably dressed, surrounded by her own army of expensive lawyers, with a predatory smile that found easy prey, Sarah had to muster all the strength she had not to run. The battle was just beginning, and the price of defeat would be higher than anyone was prepared to pay. The hearing room was smaller than Sarah expected. Walls painted a depressing, institutional beige, a long table for the judge, uncomfortable plastic chairs for the parties. The air conditioning buzzed too loudly, creating a background noise that made everything even tenser. Sarah sat next to Richard and the team of lawyers, their hands intertwined in her lap with enough strength to turn her knuckles white. On the other side of the room, Beatrice Miller was the embodiment of lethal elegance. She wore a pearl grey suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary, her hair perfectly styled, posture erect, conveying absolute confidence. Her three lawyers looked like hungry sharks, flipping through documents with satisfied smiles. "All rise," announced the court officer. "Judge Mariana Fonseca presiding." The judge entered, a woman in her 50s with short grey hair, a stern expression but not necessarily hostile. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and spent several minutes in silence reading the documents. In front of her, each second felt like an eternity. "Well," she finally began, her voice firm and controlled, "we are here for a preliminary hearing regarding the custody petition filed by Ms. Beatrice Miller concerning the minor David Miller, currently under the custody of his father, Richard Miller. The allegations are serious: parental neglect, exposure to inappropriate relationships, inappropriate behavior." She removed her glasses, looking directly at both sides. "Let's be clear from the start. I am not here to judge the life choices of adults. I am here to assess the best interest of the child. That is all that matters." "Your Honor," Beatrice's lead lawyer stood up, "I would like to begin by presenting photographic evidence documenting the questionable relationship between Mr. Richard Miller and Ms. Sarah Johnson, the daughter of the housekeeper who works in his residence." Sarah felt her blood boil at the term housekeeper said that way, as if it was something dirty, but she forced herself to maintain a neutral expression. The lawyer began projecting the photos onto a screen, all images Sarah had seen before, but now enlarged and presented with dramatic narration. "Here we see Mr. Miller dropping Miss Johnson off at her residence at 11 p.m. Here they are leaving a restaurant together, clearly in a romantic context. Here, a kiss on the forehead. And here," he paused theatrically, "Miss Johnson entering Mr. Miller's apartment at 7 p.m. on a Saturday and leaving only at 6 a.m. on Sunday." "That's a lie!" Sarah couldn't contain herself. "I never—" "Mrs. Johnson," the judge interrupted her, but not harshly, "you will have the opportunity to speak. For now, please remain silent." Sarah bit her lip, feeling Richard discreetly squeeze her hand under the table. "In addition to the photographic evidence," the lawyer continued, "we have testimonies from staff members of the apartment complex confirming frequent visits from Ms. Johnson, often at inappropriate hours. We also have statements from educators who express concern about the excessive attachment that minor David has developed for a woman he has known for only a few months." "Excessive attachment," Richard's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, I would like to remind you that the child lost his mother at the age of 4. The fact that he is forming a healthy bond with a positive female figure is exactly what child grief specialists recommend, not the opposite." "We will get to that," the judge said. "Continue, Mr. Andrade." Beatrice's lawyer smiled like a predator. "There is also the issue of professional conflict of interest. Ms. Johnson was hired by Mr. Miller's company in a senior position, with a salary significantly above the market average for someone with her limited experience. This raises questions about the nature of the relationship, whether it is genuinely professional or if there are elements of nepotism and inappropriate favoritism. $28,000 a month, according to our documents," he continued, letting the number echo in the room. "For a nutritionist with less than a year of experience. Meanwhile, professionals with 10 to 15 years of experience in the same field, they earn an average of $18,000. The discrepancy is suggestive." Sarah felt the humiliation burn. Every word was calculated to make her appear exactly what Beatrice wanted, an opportunist who took advantage of everything. "Your Honor," Mr. Miller's lawyer intervened, "if I may, I would like to present our counter-argument." Proceed. First, regarding the alleged inappropriate relationship. The lawyer opened a thick folder. Here are reports from David's school for the last 6 months. Grades have improved by 25%. Incidents of anxiety and crying have decreased from 3 times a week to none in the last month. The responsible teacher describes David as happier, more confident, more communicative. And this coincides exactly with when Ms. Johnson entered his life. She projected new documents on the screen. Here, a report from the child psychologist who has been following David since his mother's death. Dr. Patricia Smith writes, and I quote, "David shows significant progress in processing grief. For the first time in 3 years, he talks about the future with hope instead of fear. He frequently mentions a female figure named Sarah who teaches him about nutrition, dinosaurs, and makes him feel safe. This bond is extremely healthy and should be encouraged, not discouraged." Sarah felt her eyes burn, but blinked the tears back. Second, the lawyer continued, regarding the professional issue, Ms. Johnson was not hired through nepotism. She was hired because she developed an innovative sports nutrition program that is generating measurable results and real profit for the company. She distributed copies of financial reports. The pilot unit where the program was implemented saw a 32% increase in revenue in the first quarter. A waiting list of 200 clients, 3 positive articles in specialized publications. If this is nepotism, it's the most successful kind in history. And regarding the salary, she added, it is within the market average for a director of nutrition with a proprietary program. It's not a favor. It's recognition of added value. Beatrice's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, all of this is irrelevant to the central issue. Mr. Miller is exposing his minor son to an adult relationship before it is appropriate. The child has barely processed the loss of his mother and is already being encouraged to see another woman. As a substitute, this is harmful to emotional development. With all due respect, Mr. Miller's lawyer cut in, there is no evidence that David sees Ms. Johnson as a substitute for his mother. The psychological reports are clear. He perfectly differentiates between the memory of his deceased mother and the affection he feels for Sarah. They are completely different things in his child's mind. The judge raised her hand, asking for silence. Enough. I have read all the documents both sides have presented. Now I want to hear directly from the parties involved. She looked at Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, please stand. Mr. Miller stood, his posture rigid but dignified. Yes, Your Honor. How many hours do you work per week, on average? 60, 65 hours. And who takes care of David during that time? He is at school from 8 to 3. After that, he is with the nanny, Sarah, who has been with us for 2 years. My housekeeper, Mrs. Johnson, Sarah's mother, is also always present. When I can, I leave work at 6 to have dinner with him, help with homework, and put him to bed. When you can. How often does that happen? Mr. Miller hesitated, and Sarah saw the pain cross his face. 3, maybe 4 times a week. So on most days, you don't see your son awake except in the morning. Yes, that is correct. Mr. Miller's voice was hoarse. And I hate that. Every day I hate that. But I am building a business, securing his future, trying to be successful enough so that he never has to work as hard as you do, the judge finished. Mr. Miller, I am not judging your work ethic. I am trying to understand the bigger picture. Now, about your relationship with Ms. Johnson. Is it romantic? Tense silence. Sarah held her breath. Yes, Mr. Miller finally replied. It is romantic. I love her. And I know this complicates things. I know it's inconvenient for the case. But I will not lie about it. Beatrice made a disapproving sound that echoed through the room. And do you think it's appropriate to start a serious relationship just 3 years after your wife's death, with your son still processing the loss? I didn't plan to fall in love, Mr. Miller said, his voice firmer now. It just happened, and it happened precisely because Sarah is the right person. She doesn't try to replace Emily. She doesn't pretend David's mother didn't exist. She simply cares, genuinely. No agenda, no interest in anything other than making my son happy. And yes, that made me love her. Because anyone who cares for my son with such dedication deserves to be loved. Sarah had to bite her lip hard to avoid crying. "Miss Johnson," the judge turned to her. "Please stand." Sarah stood, her legs trembling, but her head held high. "How long after meeting Mr. Miller did you start working for him?" 1 week. "Your Honor, he invited me to present a sports nutrition project. The project was approved by the partners and the finance department, not just by him." "And when did the romantic relationship begin?" "Officially, about 3 weeks ago." "But," Sarah hesitated, deciding on complete honesty, "feelings had been developing for longer, probably since the 2nd month working together. And doesn't that create a conflict of interest?" "It could create one if I let it, but I take great pride in my work to compromise it with personal relationships. Every professional decision I make is based on data, results, and benefits. And for the company, Raphael, Mr. Miller, questions my work constantly, as he should. There is no favoritism." "But there is a perception of favoritism. Do you understand that?" "I understand. And I understand that it's unfair, because if I were a man, no one would question my competence just because I'm romantically involved with someone in the company. But yes, I understand that the perception exists." Sarah took a deep breath. "Can I ask a question, Your Honor?" The judge raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You may. If I weren't the daughter of a housekeeper, if I came from a wealthy family, if my mother were a lawyer or a doctor, would this perception still exist? Or what really bothers people is that someone like me, who came from humble beginnings, who worked 2 jobs while attending college, who never had anything handed to her, managed to build something on her own merit and even had the audacity to fall in love with someone above my social class?" "Mrs. Johnson," Beatrice's lawyer tried to interrupt. "No, let her speak," the judge ordered, genuinely interested now. "I didn't take advantage of anyone," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the tears starting to fall. "I didn't use my mother as a stepping stone. I presented a solid project based on research with real profit potential, and I was hired because I'm good at what I do. And I fell in love with Richard because he is a good man, a dedicated father who is doing the best he can in an impossible situation. Not because he has money, not because he can give me a better life, but because when he looks at me, he sees me, Sarah, not the housekeeper's daughter, not the opportunist, not the threat, just Sarah." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Beatrice seemed momentarily speechless. "And David," the judge asked softly, "how would you describe your relationship with him?" Sarah wiped her tears, regaining her composure. "I love that boy. Not because I'm paid to do so, not because I need to impress his father, but because he is impossible not to love. He is smart, curious, brave, despite all the fear. He lost his mother at such a young age and still manages to smile, to trust, to love. And I feel honored that he chose to include me in that circle of trust. I'm not trying to be his mother. His mother was Emily, and nothing changes that. But I can be someone who cares, who is present, who makes him feel safe. And if that is a crime, then convict me." The judge remained silent for a long time, looking at her notes, at the documents, at the people in front of her. Finally, she turned to Beatrice. "Mrs. Miller, can you please stand?" Beatrice stood up with calculated elegance. "Yes, Your Honor." You claim that you are doing this for your grandson's well-being, but I must ask, when was the last time you spent an entire day with David? Not a formal visit, but a full day? Beatrice hesitated, clearly not expecting this question. I'm not sure. A few months, perhaps. A few months. And how often did you call him before starting this process? I was in Europe. I had commitments. That is not what I asked. How often? Once a month, maybe. Once a month. And do you think that qualifies as genuine interest in the child's well-being? Or does that sound more like an attempt to control your son's life? I care about my grandson, Beatrice raised, her voice for the first time. I'm trying to protect him from a harmful situation. Or are you trying to punish your son for moving on after your daughter-in-law's death? For finding happiness again? The judge took off her glasses, staring directly at Beatrice. Mrs. Miller, I read your history. You also opposed your son's marriage to Emily. You also tried to interfere when David was born, questioning parenting decisions. This is not about the child's well-being. This is about control. With all due respect, Beatrice's lawyer began. Silence. The judge put her glasses back on. I will give my preliminary decision, but first I want to speak with David, alone, in a controlled environment, with a psychologist present. This will happen tomorrow. Until then, custody remains with the father, but with no contact between the minor and Miss Johnson. Sarah's heart sank. Your Honor, Richard protested. It's temporary, Mr. Miller, just until I hear what David has to say about the situation. If, as everyone claims, he is happy and healthy, that will be evident in the conversation. Hearing adjourned. We will reconvene on Friday for a final decision. The gavel struck, and it was over. Sarah left the room feeling simultaneously relieved and devastated. They hadn't lost, yet, but they also hadn't won. And now everything depended on a 7-year-old boy finding the right words to explain complicated feelings that even adults struggled to understand. Outside the courthouse, Richard pulled her into a tight embrace, ignoring the curious looks from lawyers and other parties. You were amazing in there, he whispered into her hair. So strong, so honest. I almost ruined everything with that emotional speech, Sarah murmured against his chest. No, you were human, and I think that's exactly what the judge needed to see. That you're not calculating, you're not an opportunist, you're real. And what if David says the wrong thing tomorrow? What if he gets nervous, if his mother confuses him? That won't happen. David knows how he feels, and he will tell the truth. Richard pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. No matter what happens, Sarah, I will not give up on you. Never. Even if it means losing David, I will not lose David, because the truth is on our side. But as Sarah returned home that May afternoon, with the grey sky threatening more rain, she couldn't shake the fear gnawing inside her. Truth didn't always prevail, justice didn't always win, and sometimes good people lost precious things simply because the world was unfair. She could only pray that this time would be different, that this time love would be enough. The night after the hearing was the longest of Sarah's life. She stayed awake until 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of the tiny room, the phone in hand in case Richard or David needed her. Mrs. Johnson had tried to comfort her with chamomile tea and words of encouragement, but even her mother looked visibly worried. The tension was palpable in the small apartment, like a third invisible presence occupying all the space. Richard, in turn, spent the night at the office, surrounded by documents and financial projections that he couldn't really process. His mind was stuck on the image of David being questioned by a judge, a psychologist beside him, having to explain feelings he barely understood. It was 3:30 in the morning when he finally gave up on working and went home, finding David awake in the living room, watching old cartoons with the volume low. "Champ, what are you doing awake?" Richard sat down on the sofa next to his son, his heart tightening at the sight of the dark circles under the little boy's eyes. "I can't sleep," David admitted, hugging the stuffed dinosaur that Sarah had given him months ago. "I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Of the conversation tomorrow. Grandma Bia said the judge is going to ask me a lot of hard questions. She said if I don't answer right, I will have to live with her away from you." David's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to live far from you, Dad." Richard pulled his son into a tight embrace, feeling his own throat close up. "That's not going to happen, son. I promise it won't happen." "How do you know? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I forget the right words?" David was now sobbing, all the accumulated fear finally overflowing. "I'm not good with words. You always say I need to articulate better when I ask for things." "Hey, look at me." Richard held his son's little face between his hands, wiping the tears with his thumbs. "You don't need to be good with fancy words. You just need to tell the truth about how you feel. That's what the judge wants to hear, not right or wrong answers, but honesty. What if I talk about Sarah? Grandma Bia said I shouldn't talk about her, that it will make everything worse." Richard felt anger boiling inside him. His mother had clearly been filling David's head with fear and manipulation. "David, listen to me very carefully. You will talk about whoever you want to talk about. If Sarah makes you happy, if you like her, you can say that. It's not wrong to like someone who is nice to you. But Grandma Bia said Sarah only pretends to like me because she wants your money. And do you believe that?" David was quiet for a moment, processing. "No," he finally said, "because Sarah has already given me gifts without you asking. And she teaches me things even when you're not around. And when I'm sad, she gets sad too, not pretending. You can see it in her eyes." "Exactly. So when the judge asks about Sarah tomorrow, you just need to say that. Speak the truth about how you really feel, not what Grandma or anyone else told you to say. Do you promise it won't go wrong?" Richard wanted to promise. He wanted to give his son the absolute security that every child deserves. But he also knew he couldn't make promises he might not be able to keep. "I promise I will fight with everything I have for us to stay together, and no matter what happens, you will always be my #1 priority. Always." David nodded, looking a little calmer. "Can I sleep here on the sofa with you?" "Of course you can, champ." They fell asleep right there, David curled up against his father's and chest, the stuffed dinosaur squeezed between them, and when the sun finally rose through the large windows of the apartment, bringing the Friday that would define everything, both woke up with the silent determination to face whatever came together. The room where David would be interviewed was completely different from the formal courtroom. Walls painted in soft pastel shades, comfortable sofas instead of plastic chairs, shelves filled with books and toys, even some drawings on the wall made by other children who had passed through there. It was an attempt to make the environment less intimidating, but David was still visibly nervous when he entered holding hands with Richard. Dr. Patricia Smith, the child psychologist who had been working with David, was there, which at least was a familiar face, and Judge Mariana had swapped her formal suit for something more casual, trying to appear less imposing. But David clung to his father's leg, clearly scared. "Hi, David," the judge began in a gentle voice. "Do you remember me? I'm Judge Mariana. I spoke with your dad yesterday." David nodded shyly. "Your dad will have to wait outside while we talk, okay? But Dr. Patricia, who you already know, will stay here with us, and if you want to stop at any time, you can stop." "Can I bring my dinosaur?" David clutched the toy. "Of course you can. What's his name?" "Rex. Because he's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. David relaxed a little when talking about dinosaurs. His favorite subject was always a safe haven. Richard knelt in front of his son. "You're going to be okay, champ. Just tell the truth about how you feel, remember? And Dad will be right outside waiting. Promise you won't leave?" "I promise. I'm not going anywhere." After Richard left, the judge spent the first 15 minutes just casually chatting with David about dinosaurs, school, and judo, establishing trust, making him comfortable. David gradually relaxed, getting excited, talking about the science project he was doing on paleontology. "David," the judge finally said when the boy was clearly more at ease, "I wanted to talk to you about your home, your family. How are you?" "I'm good." "Tell me what a normal day is like for you, from when you wake up until you go to sleep." David thought for a moment. "I wake up at 7. Grandma Johnson makes breakfast. She makes the best cheese bread. Then I go to school with Aunt Sarah. School is fun. I like science class and gym. After school, I come home, do homework with Aunt Sarah or Grandma Johnson. Sometimes Dad comes home early and has dinner with me, but not always. Then I take a shower, brush my teeth, and go to sleep. And on weekends, it depends. Sometimes Dad works. Then I stay with Grandma Johnson, or Aunt Sarah takes me to the park. When Dad isn't working, we go out together. We've been to the aquarium, the science museum, and the zoo. Do you like spending time with your dad?" "I like it a lot." David smiled. "He's busy, but when he's really with me, without his phone ringing all the time, it's really nice. He knows everything about muscles and exercise, and he's trying to learn about dinosaurs because of me. And do you feel safe at home?" "Safe? Yes. Do you feel like someone is taking care of you? That you're protected?" "Oh yes, Dad takes care of me. And Grandma Johnson does too. And now Sarah takes care of me as well." The judge made a note. "Tell me about Sarah." David's face lit up in a way that Dr. Patricia immediately noticed and noted. "Sarah is really cool. She knows everything about food and the body. She taught me that sweets aren't the enemy, that you can have them sometimes, just not too much. And she makes a special hot chocolate that's really tasty and has hidden vitamins that don't even taste like vitamins." "Do you spend a lot of time together?" "Not as much as I want. She works with Dad, so sometimes she's at his office, but when she comes home, she always talks to me. She explains things to me. She listens when I want to talk about dinosaurs, even though she has a lot of work, and she never gets mad when I ask questions." "And how do you feel when you're with her?" David thought seriously. "Happy and, I don't know the word, safe, like when I'm with Dad, but different. Sarah listens differently. She's not worried about meetings or important calls. When she's with me, it's just me." "Does your dad worry about meetings when he's with you?" "Sometimes," David admitted, then quickly added, "but he's getting better. He's trying to put his phone aside more. Ever since Sarah started coming around, he's improved in that." The judge made more notes. "David, your Grandma Bea, did she say anything to you about Sarah?" David looked visibly uncomfortable. "She said that Sarah isn't good, that she's just pretending to like me, to get Dad's money." "And do you believe that?" "No." The answer came quickly and emphatically. "Grandma Bea is wrong. Sarah gives me gifts without Dad asking. She called me when I was sick and Dad had a trip just to see if I was better. She remembered my birthday before Dad did. Dad forgot because he was too busy, but he remembered later and felt really sad. Sarah didn't forget." "And does that make you happy, that she remembers those things?" "It makes me very happy, because it means she really cares." David hugged the dinosaur tighter. "Can I say something that no one knows?" "Of course, David. You can say anything." "I'm afraid she'll leave, like how Mom did." The boy's voice became small. I know that Mom didn't want to leave, that it was an accident, but she did. And now, Grandma Bea keeps saying that Sarah will leave too, that she's not real, and I'm scared that it might be true. Dr. Patricia gently intervened. David, do you remember our talks about your mom? About how sometimes bad things happen, but it's no one's fault? I remember. And do you remember I said that just because something bad happened doesn't mean it will happen again? I remember. But the fear stays in my stomach anyway. That's completely normal, the judge said. And do you know what's very brave? You having that fear and still letting people get close to you. That shows you're strong, David. I don't feel strong. I cry sometimes when I'm alone. Crying doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Even adults cry sometimes. Dad doesn't cry. At least I've never seen him. Dr. Patricia exchanged a significant look with the judge. David, if you could choose, what would your perfect family look like? It doesn't have to be a real family. It can be any way you want. David thought for a long moment. I wish Mom was still alive, but I know that can't happen. So I wish it was me, Dad, and Sarah. And Grandma Johnson too, because she's like a real grandma, not like Grandma Bea, who just complains. And Aunt Sarah, and my friends from school. He paused. But mainly me, Dad, and Sarah, like a family. And do you think that would be good? Sarah being part of your family officially? It would be the best. David got excited for the first time in the conversation, because then she wouldn't leave. It would be real, not just while she's working with Dad. And I could call her, not Mom, because I already had a mom and I don't want to replace her, but just, I don't know, just Sarah. But Sarah from the family, not Sarah from the visit. The judge, David, smiled, a genuine and warm expression. Thank you for talking to me, Sarah. You were very brave and very honest. Is there anything else you want to tell me? Anything you think is important? David thought seriously. Yes, there is. I want you to know that Dad is a good father. He works a lot, and sometimes he gets tired, and sometimes he forgets things. But he loves me very much. I know that. And Sarah makes him happier. When she's around, he smiles more. And when he smiles more, I feel happier too. So, if you're deciding something about our family, I want you to know that I want to stay with Dad. And I want Sarah to stay too. I understand. Thank you, David. You can call your dad now. When Richard entered, David ran to him immediately, hugging him tightly. The judge observed the interaction, the way Richard automatically knelt to be at his son's height, how his hands checked David's face for signs of distress, how he whispered words of encouragement that she couldn't hear but clearly calmed the boy. Mr. Miller, thank you for bringing David, she said. The final hearing will be at 2 o'clock. Please be present with your legal team. At 2 in the afternoon, the courtroom was even more crowded than the first time. Beatrice was there with her lawyers, Richard with his, and Sarah, who technically didn't need to be present but had been summoned by the judge. Mrs. Johnson was also there, called as a witness regarding the attempted bribery. The tension was palpable when Judge Fonseca entered. She wasted no time with preliminaries. After reviewing all the documentation presented, hearing the testimonies, and especially after speaking extensively with minor David Miller, I have reached my decision. She adjusted her glasses, looking directly at Beatrice. Mrs. Miller, your custody request is denied, completely. Beatrice turned pale. But, Your Honor, I'm not finished. The judge's voice was firm. In addition to denying the request, I am ordering that your visits with David be supervised for the next 6 months. This is because it has become evident that you use these visits to emotionally manipulate the child, instilling fears and insecurities to benefit your legal case. This is unacceptable. I have rights as a grandmother. You do have rights, yes, but those rights do not include using a vulnerable child as a pawn in a family dispute. David is a 7-year-old boy who lost his mother. He doesn't need more trauma. He needs stability, love, and adults who put his well-being above their own agendas. The judge turned to Richard. Mr. Miller, custody remains with you. David is clearly well cared for, healthy and progressing academically and emotionally. Yes, you work a lot, but all parents work. What matters is that when you are with your son, you are present. And from the reports, this is improving. Thank you, Your Honor, Richard said, his voice choked. But I have some recommendations. Continue David's psychological support. Keep trying to balance work and fatherhood. I know it's not easy, but it's important and... She looked at Sarah, about Ms. Johnson. Sarah's heart stopped. David spoke extensively about you. With genuine love, with gratitude, with hope. He clearly sees you as a positive and stabilizing figure in his life. Not as a replacement for his mother, he was very clear about that, but as someone who cares, who is present, who makes him feel safe. The judge paused. It is not the role of this court to dictate personal relationships of adults, but it is my role to assess the best interest of the child. And in David's case, having Ms. Johnson in his life seems to be part of that best interest. Sarah felt tears begin to fall and did not try to hold them back. Therefore, there is no legal impediment for the relationship between Mr. Miller and Ms. Johnson to continue, as long as it is conducted appropriately and always with David's well-being as a priority. The judge looked directly at Sarah. Ms. Johnson, David trusts you. Do not break that trust. Never, Your Honor, Sarah managed to say. I promise. Regarding the attempted bribery, the judge continued, now looking at Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson provided detailed testimony about the offer of $50,000 in exchange for false testimony. Mrs. Beatrice, this is a crime. I am referring this information to the district attorney for investigation. Beatrice was as pale as a sheet, her lips pressed into a thin line. This hearing is adjourned. Custody remains with Richard Miller. Beatrice Millers. Her visits will be supervised and re-evaluated in 6 months. Should there be any non-compliance or further attempts at manipulation, visits will be completely suspended. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, Richard said. Beatrice remained silent, defeated. The gavel struck, and it was over. It was really over. Outside the courthouse, under the strong May sun that had finally won over the clouds, Sarah collapsed into Richard's arms. Mrs. Johnson was openly crying, embraced by the lawyers who congratulated her for her courage. People passed by, curious about the dramatic scene, but no one cared. We won, Sarah whispered against Richard's chest. We really won. You won, Richard corrected, holding her face in his hands. You fought when I was scared. You were brave when I wanted to give up. You saved this. You saved us. We saved together. Together, Richard agreed, and kissed her right there in broad daylight, not caring who saw. When they finally pulled apart, Mrs. Johnson was beside them, smiling through tears. My daughter, your father would be so proud. And you, Mom? Are you proud? More than words can say. Richard hugged Mrs. Johnson too, surprising the woman. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, for raising such an extraordinary daughter, for being brave enough to refuse that money, for believing in us. You both deserve it. All the happiness in the world, Mrs. Johnson simply said. Now go get David and tell him the good news. That boy needs to know he can stop being afraid. David was at Dr. Patricia's house, who had offered to watch him during the hearing. When Richard and Sarah arrived together, deliberately together, he was in the garden drawing dinosaurs with colored chalk on the cement floor. Dad! Sarah! He dropped the chalk and ran but stopped, halfway, fear still visible. What happened? Do I have to go away? No, Richard said, kneeling down to open his arms. "You stay with me, forever. No one is going to take you away from me." David threw himself into his dad's arms, crying with relief. And when he finally calmed down enough to look around, he saw Sarah there too, with red eyes but smiling. "And Sarah," he asked, his voice small, "is she staying too?" Sarah knelt down beside them, and Richard pulled her into the hug, the three of them together in the garden under the afternoon sun. "I'm staying too," she promised, "if you want me to stay. I want so much. Then I'll stay, not as a visitor, but as family. Sarah the family member, not Sarah the visitor. Remember you told that to the judge?" David's eyes widened. "Did she tell you?" "She did. And do you know what else she said? That you were very brave, very honest, very strong." "I didn't feel strong. I was very scared." "But you did it anyway," Richard said. "And that, son, is what true courage means. It's not about not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing it anyway." They stayed there for a long time, the three of them embraced in the garden, as the sun slowly descended toward the horizon. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would still be challenges, there would still be difficult conversations, there would still be scars to heal, but it was a true beginning, the beginning of a non-traditional but authentic family, the beginning of a love that had survived tests that would have destroyed lesser people, the beginning of a life built not despite the difficulties but strengthened by them. And as the sky painted, itself orange and pink, three people, a man learning to balance ambition and presence, a woman learning to accept love without guilt, and a boy learning that family could be redefined without betraying memory, found something none of them expected, but all desperately needed: home. The months of June and July brought a subtle but profound transformation in everyone's routine. It wasn't a dramatic change. Sarah didn't move into Richard's apartment. There were no big announcements or public celebrations. But there was a new lightness in the air, a feeling that they could finally breathe without the constant weight of fear and uncertainty. The first major change came in the form of boundaries that Richard finally learned to establish. On a Monday in June, he called a meeting with all the managers and announced something that shocked the entire company. He was delegating operational responsibilities. He hired an experienced COO, Carlos Andrade, a former executive from an international gym chain, to manage the day-to-day operations. "I built this company from scratch," Richard explained to Sarah during one of the morning coffees that now happened at 7 instead of 6. Allowing him to take David to school first. "I always thought that if I didn't control every detail, everything would fall apart. But the truth is, it was killing me. And it was killing my relationship with my son." "And with your girlfriend," Sarah teased, biting into a piece of whole-grain bread with cream cheese that she had prepared herself. "Especially with my girlfriend," Richard agreed, smiling in that way that still made Sarah's heart race. "By the way, she's completely transforming the fitness industry in the US and deserves a boyfriend who isn't always too exhausted to celebrate her victories." And there were plenty of victories. The sports nutrition program had been implemented in 6 locations by the end of June, all reporting significant increases in revenue and customer satisfaction. More importantly, it had become a success story discussed in trade magazines, industry conferences, and even a segment on a Sunday program on NBC about health innovation. "Sarah Johnson is revolutionizing the way Americans think about nutrition and fitness," the reporter announced, as images of the Central Park Towers location flashed on the screen. At 28 years old, this nutritionist, who started as an external consultant, is now the director of nutrition for one of the largest gym chains in the country, and her secret: solid science, a humanized approach, and an absolute refusal to follow fad diets. David watched the program with absurd pride, jumping on the couch. "Sarah's on TV! Dad, Sarah's on TV!" "I know, champ," Richard laughed, filming his son's reaction while Sarah hid her face, embarrassed. "She's famous now." "I'm not famous," Sarah protested. "It was a 5-minute segment on a variety show." "You appeared on national TV talking about your work," Mrs. Johnson said, wiping tears of pride as she watched from her feet, refusing to sit on the living room couch. "It's not my place," she insisted, no matter how many times Richard asked. "My daughter, on television, speaking as an expert." "Sit here, Grandma Johnson," David pulled her hand. "You're not a staff member when the TV is on. It's family watching together." The simplicity of the child's logic made everyone laugh, but it also made Mrs. Johnson finally sit down, tears streaming freely now. Richard had offered several times to change her work arrangement, raise her salary, reduce her hours, even early retirement with a good pension, but Mrs. Johnson refused. "Working keeps me young," she insisted. "And besides, who else is going to make sure you eat real vegetables and not just protein powder?" The dynamic in the apartment had evolved into something unique. Mrs. Johnson still worked there, but she was no longer treated merely as a staff member. She dined with them. When Sarah was present, she participated in decisions about David and was consulted on everything related to the home. Richard raised his salary by 40% regardless of her acceptance, and established a generous retirement fund that would ensure financial dignity when she decided to stop working. "You took care of my son when I was away too much," Richard said when Mrs. Johnson tried to refuse the raise. "You raised the woman I love. It's not a favor, it's fair recognition." July brought another significant milestone. Sarah developed a nutrition app that went viral almost overnight. It wasn't just another calorie counting app. It was a complete educational platform that taught people to have a healthy relationship with food, not just to follow restrictive diets. Nutri-Real was the name David suggested during dinner because it's real nutrition, not those lies on the internet about just eating lettuce. The name stuck, and the app exploded. 50,000 downloads in the first week, 200,000 in the first month. Investors started calling, interested in funding expansion. Major tech companies showed interest in partnership or acquisition. One company offered $8 million for the app and the intellectual property, Sarah told Richard and her mother one Sunday night, still processing the magnitude of the number. $8 million. I don't even know what to do with this information. "You refuse," Richard said immediately. "It's way too little. The growth potential is at least 3 times that." "But it's $8 million, Richard. I've never seen even $1 million in my life. And you're not going to sell for a fraction of its real value just because the number seems big now." Richard was in executive mode, analyzing coldly. "Let's sit down with financial advisors, evaluate options. You can accept investment while maintaining majority control. You can license the technology instead of selling. You can grow organically, but you're not going to sell your creation for less than it's worth." "Our creation," Sarah corrected. "You invested in the beta version, remember? Technically, it's ours." "Sarah, I put in $20,000. You put in 11 months of work, all your expertise, your vision. It's yours, and it's worth much more than $8 million. They ended up accepting investment from a venture capital firm specialized in health tech, $3 million for 20% of the company, valuing Nutri-Real at $15 million. Sarah kept 60%, Richard retained his 20% from the initial investment, and the remainder was distributed among the developers who helped build it. "You're a millionaire," Mrs. Johnson whispered when the documents were signed. "My daughter is a millionaire." "On paper," Sarah laughed, still not fully processing. "The company is worth that, but it doesn't mean I have that money in the bank. Still, you built something from nothing. Something worth millions. You, the girl who slept on a couch for 2 years to save on rent while going to college." Sarah hugged her mother, feeling the weight of generations of struggle and sacrifice finally paying off. "We built this, Mum. You worked 2 jobs to keep me in school. You gave up everything to give me a chance. This is ours." "No, my daughter, this is yours. I just gave you a foundation. You built the building." With the success of the app came media attention that Sarah was not prepared to handle. Invitations for podcasts, magazine interviews, speaking engagements at conferences. And with the attention, inevitably, came the nasty comments on social media. Of course she achieved all this. She's dating the owner of the company. Classic gold digger, the maid's daughter who snagged the boss. I bet the app is a copy of something foreign. She's pretty, I'll give her that. She knew how to use the tools she had. Sarah tried to ignore it, but the comments hurt, especially because they touched on her own insecurities. The constant fear that maybe people were right, maybe she didn't deserve all of this, maybe it was just luck and connections. "Are you paying attention to internet comments?" Richard asked when he found her crying in the office one Thursday afternoon, staring at her phone. "It's just that they say exactly what I already think about myself," Sarah admitted. "What if they're right? What if I only succeeded because I'm with you?" Richard took the phone from her hand, placed it on the table, and held her face between his hands. "Sarah Johnson, listen to me. You developed a sports nutrition methodology that is documented to be changing lives. You created an app that has 500,000 active users who don't know and don't care who you're dating. You were top of your class in college before you met me. You published academic articles before you met me. You built a solid reputation before you met me. But no buts. People are going to talk. They will always talk, because it's easier to attribute your success to luck or connections than to admit that you are incredibly competent and worked harder than most." He wiped her tears with his thumbs. "And you know what's funny? No one questions my success. No one says I only built FitLife because my family had money. But they question you. Why? Because you're a woman. Because you're young. Because you came from humble beginnings. The world struggles to accept that people like you, and when I say people like you, I mean extraordinary, can achieve great things on their own merit." Sarah rested her forehead against his, taking a deep breath. "How do you always know what to say?" "Because I know you. I know your work. I know your ethics. And I know how hard you punish yourself for things that aren't your fault." He kissed her forehead gently. "Now, block those toxic profiles. Take a break from social media for a few days and come with me to pick up David from school. He asked you to teach him how to make that carrot cake that Grandma Johnson makes." "Carrot cake?" "He insists that if Grandma Johnson and you two make it, it must be the most delicious thing in the world. Want to prove you can do it too." Sarah smiled despite the tears. "He knows that carrot cake has carrots in it, right? Vegetable? He knows, and he's willing to try vegetable disguised as dessert." The attempt to make carrot cake that afternoon became one of Sarah's favorite memories. David took the task seriously like a scientist, measuring ingredients with obsessive precision, mixing with total concentration, licking the spoon when he thought no one was watching. "Grandma Johnson, am I doing it right?" he shouted to the kitchen where Mrs. Johnson was supervising from a distance while preparing dinner. "It's perfect, my love. Just don't forget to grease the pan properly." Richard was leaning against the counter, just watching, with an expression that Sarah had learned to recognize. Admiration mixed with gratitude, as if he still couldn't completely believe that this was real, that this chaotic domestic scene was his life now. "Dad, taste this." David offered a spoonful of raw batter. "Son, you can't eat raw batter. It has eggs." "But just a little taste." "David," Sarah intervened, "how about we make a deal? You wait for it to bake, and then you can have the first slice, and I promise it will be so good that the wait will be worth it. You promise?" "I promise." 40 minutes later, when the smell of carrot cake filled the entire apartment and David danced with anticipation waiting for it to cool, Richard pulled Sarah aside in the kitchen. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Why?" "For this. For making him feel capable. For turning learning about healthy food into a happy moment. For—" He paused, searching for the right words. "For being you. For being here. For not giving up when it got hard." "I love you both," Sarah said simply. "How could I give up?" "Dad, Sarah." "The cake is cool. Can I cut it?" David shouted from the kitchen. "Yes, champ!" The cake was perfect, moist, just sweet enough, with the chocolate frosting that David insisted on making by himself, which turned out a bit uneven but delicious. They ate right there in the kitchen, still standing, David narrating the entire process with enthusiasm, Mrs. Johnson taking photos with her phone, Richard and Sarah exchanging glances that said everything words could not. "Grandma Johnson, do you think I can take a piece to school tomorrow?" David asked, already on his third piece. "I think so, my love, but just one piece or there won't be anything left for your afternoon snack." "Can I say I made it?" "Of course! You really did. But what if no one believes me? What if they say boys don't make cake?" "Then you tell them that boys can do anything they want to do," Sarah said. "Cooking isn't just for girls or boys. It's for people who love to eat good food." "And what if they tease me?" "Then you offer them a piece," Richard suggested. "Hard to tease with a mouthful of delicious cake." David considered this, with the seriousness of someone evaluating a military strategy. "Makes sense. Okay, I'll take it. And I'll say I made it with Sarah and Grandma Johnson. Then if anyone says it's a lie, they can confirm." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "Always have witnesses to your accomplishments." August arrived with a surprise that no one expected. Beatrice asked to meet with Richard. Not through lawyers, not in a formal setting, but a simple request via text message. "I need to talk to you. Just the two of us. Please." Richard showed the message to Sarah. "What do you think?" "I think you should go, but in a public place, and maybe with someone present. They don't need to participate in the conversation. Just be nearby, just for safety." They arranged to meet at a cafe in Central Park on a Saturday afternoon. Richard went alone, but with Mrs. Johnson strategically seated at a table across the room, pretending to read a magazine but alert. Beatrice looked different, still elegant, but there was something diminished about her, her shoulders less rigid, her face less masked. She had visibly aged in the past few months. "Thank you for coming," she began. When Richard sat down, "You said it was important." "It is." Beatrice stirred the coffee she had ordered but didn't drink. "I need to apologize for everything." Richard remained silent, waiting. "I was wrong. About Sarah. About you. About what's best for David. She paused, her voice breaking for the first time that Richard could remember. "I was so afraid of losing my grandson, of losing my only connection to you, that I did everything wrong." "You tried to take my son away from me," Richard said, his voice controlled but heavy with pain. "You tried to destroy the reputation of the woman I love. You bribed witnesses. I know, and I have no excuse, just an explanation, perhaps." Beatrice finally looked at him directly. "When your father died, 5 years ago, I lost my purpose. My whole life was being his wife, your mother, and suddenly he was gone. You didn't need me anymore, and I was left empty. When Emily died, I thought I finally had a chance to be important again, to be needed. But you didn't need me. You moved on by yourself, and that made me angry." "So this was about you feeling useful?" It was about the fear of being forgotten, of being irrelevant, of aging alone without purpose. She wiped away a tear that escaped. And I channeled that in the worst possible way. Instead of building bridges, I burned them. Instead of offering support, I attacked. And now, she made a vague gesture encompassing everything, now I've lost everything. You barely talk to me. David is afraid of me, and I deserve it. Richard remained quiet for a long time. Part of him wanted to get up and leave, to leave her there with her late regret. But another part, the part that Sarah had helped develop, the part capable of empathy even when it hurt, recognized genuine pain when he saw it. "What do you want, Mom?" he finally asked. "I want a chance to fix things, not everything at once. I know this will take time, but I want a chance to be a real grandma, not the grandma who tries to control, who judges, who manipulates, but the grandma who just wants to be part of her grandson's life, who accepts the choices you make, who respects Sarah." She paused. "I'm in therapy 3 times a week. My therapist says I have control issues rooted in childhood abandonment trauma. It's not an excuse, but it's context. And what if I say no, that it's too late? Then I accept it, and I will live with the consequences of my choices." Beatrice met his gaze. "But I hope you don't say that, because despite everything, you are a good man, Richard, better than I've ever been, and good men forgive even when it's hard." Richard took a deep breath. He thought of Sarah, how she chose kindness even when it cost her. He thought of David, how he deserved a grandma who was present in a healthy way. He thought of himself, how much weight he carried from hurt and resentment. "It will take time," he finally said. "And there are conditions. You won't interfere in my personal choices. You will treat Sarah with respect, genuine, not just superficial civility. You won't use David as a weapon or messenger, and you will continue therapy. I accept all the conditions. And visits will remain supervised until I decide otherwise. I understand. It's not complete forgiveness, Mom. Not yet, but it's a chance. Just one chance. It's more than I deserve." Beatrice reached her hand across the table. "Thank you, son." Richard squeezed her hand, brief but firm. "Don't disappoint me again, because there won't be a third chance." "I won't. I promise." When Richard told Sarah about the conversation, she reacted exactly as he expected, with caution but also with compassion. "Do you think she's sincere?" Sarah asked. They were in her apartment. Richard spending more time there lately, getting to know Sarah's neighborhood, the simple but clean building, the small apartment full of warmth and life. "I think she's trying. Whether it's complete sincerity or sophisticated manipulation, time will tell. And are you okay with that? With giving her this chance? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to keep her away forever. But another part remembers that she's my mother, with all her flaws, and that David deserves at least the possibility of a healthy relationship with his paternal grandma." Sarah curled up next to him on the tiny couch, her head on his shoulder. "You're more generous than I would be. You would be exactly like this. It's who you are. I don't know. I'm still angry with her. I'm angry too, but we can be angry and still choose forgiveness. They're not mutually exclusive." They sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the closeness, the sound of the city outside, the lightness of not having a sword hanging over their heads anymore. "Richard," Sarah eventually said, "I love you. A lot. Even when everything was hard, even when I thought we might lose, I never doubted it was worth fighting for." Richard pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I love you too. More than I thought it was possible to love someone again. You've given me life, Sarah, Not just for me, but for David too. We were just surviving before you. Now we're living." "We're living," Sarah repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." And there, in that tiny apartment in the Upper West Side, so different from the luxurious triplex in Central Park Towers, but infinitely more comfortable in some ways, Richard and Sarah made plans. Not rushed, not desperate, but calm and secure. Plans for a future that included David. Business plans that combined both their strengths. Life plans that recognized that true love wasn't a fairy tale without difficulties, but a daily choice to fight together against whatever came. And out there, New York continued to pulse. Chaotic, challenging, relentless. But inside that small apartment, there was something stronger than any storm the city could bring. There was love, there was family, there was a future. And for the first time in a long time, everyone believed it would be enough. September arrived, bringing that characteristic restlessness of New York spring, the indecisive weather between the lingering cold of winter and the promised warmth of summer, the cherry blossoms beginning to paint the city in pink, and a widespread feeling of renewal in the air. For Sarah, Richard, and David, it was more than just a change of season. It was the beginning of a completely new chapter. The first big change came unexpectedly. Richard had spent weeks searching for the perfect house, something large enough to comfortably accommodate a growing family, but still with the warmth of home and not just the empty ostentation of luxury property. He wanted space for David to run and play, wanted a kitchen where everyone could cook together, wanted a backyard, or at least a generous balcony where they could have plants, maybe even a small garden. "I found it," he announced one Saturday morning, showing up at Sarah's apartment with David hanging around his neck and a wide smile on his face. "I found the perfect place." "Perfect how?" Sarah asked, pouring coffee for them while Mrs. Johnson prepared pancakes on the stove. "A house, not an apartment, a real house with a garden in Brooklyn, 4 bedrooms, an office, a huge kitchen, and a gourmet area, and there's space in the yard to build a treehouse." David's eyes widened. "A treehouse, for real?" "For real. With a rope ladder and everything." "Dad, that's the coolest thing ever!" Sarah exchanged a glance with her mother. A house. Richard was talking about a house, not a temporary apartment or incremental improvement. It was a declaration of intentions, of permanence, of future. "Do you want me to go see it?" she asked carefully. "I want you to decide if you want to live there," Richard replied, and the silence that followed was thick with meaning. Mrs. Johnson. Richard stopped stirring the tapioca, David stopped swinging his legs, and even the traffic outside seemed to quiet down. "Sarah," Richard began, "I know it's a big step. I know we've only been officially together for a few months. I know there are a lot of reasons to take it slow." He stood up, taking her hands in his. "But I also know that I wake up every day wanting you by my side. That David asks every night if you'll be there in the morning. That we're already family, Sarah. We just need to make it official." "And what about Mrs. Johnson?" Sarah looked at her mother. "Where does she fit into this plan?" "The unit in the back has a complete quarter," Richard explained, turning to Mrs. Johnson. "With a private bathroom, a small living room, and a kitchen if you want. Totally independent but connected to the main house. Or, if you prefer, I can buy an apartment nearby for you. Whatever works best. But the idea is for you to continue being part of the family, not just an employee. Because that's what you are, Mrs. Johnson. Family." Mrs. Johnson dropped the spatula, wiping her hands on her apron as tears began to fall. "Mr. Richard, you don't have to—" "I do need to," Richard gently interrupted. "You took care of my son when I was away too much. You raised the woman I love. You stood by us when it was tough. This isn't a favor, it's recognition, and it's love." Sarah was openly crying now. David had gotten down from his chair and was hugging his grandma's leg. And Mrs. Johnson, who had spent her whole life caring for others without expecting anything in return, finally allowed someone to care for her. "I accept," Sarah said, her voice choked but firm. "We accept, all of us." The move happened in October, in a coordinated operation that involved David directing where each box should go. "The dinosaurs are going to my new room." Mrs. Johnson supervising the kitchen organization with military precision, and Sarah trying to decide how to arrange the office that would be hers and Richard's. A shared space for them to work together when necessary. The house in Brooklyn was everything Richard had promised, and more. A completely renovated 1950s construction, keeping the original charm, but with all modern conveniences. The garden had a huge old cherry tree that David immediately chose as the base for his future treehouse. The kitchen was large and bright, with an island in the center where everyone could cook together. And the bedrooms, the main one for Richard and Sarah, one for David, decorated with a dinosaur theme and a solar system painted on the ceiling that glowed in the dark, one that became an office and a guest room. The unit in the back that Mrs. Johnson would occupy was small but perfect. A cozy living room, a bedroom with a closet, a spacious bathroom with a jacuzzi, a luxury she had never had, and a compact kitchen. It had a separate entrance, but also a door connected to the main house, allowing for privacy, but also integration. "Mom, you have to see the jacuzzi," Sarah said, helping to unpack things in the unit. "It's one of those with jets." "I don't even know how to use a jacuzzi," Mrs. Johnson laughed, but there was genuine joy in her voice. "It'll be a waste on me." "It won't be a waste. You deserve luxury too. You deserve all the good things." "My daughter, I already have all the good things. I have you happy, healthy, building a beautiful life. I have a borrowed grandson that I love as if he were my own blood. I have a place to call my own for the first time in decades. I'm living a dream I didn't even know I had the right to dream." They embraced there in the empty unit, surrounded by boxes and possibilities, 2 generations of strong women who had fought against everything the world threw at them, and finally were winning. The first week in the new house was chaotic but magical. David explored every corner, discovering secret hideouts behind doors, testing the acoustics of each room by shouting dinosaur names, planting seeds in the garden that Mrs. Johnson had bought. "Grandma, we're going to have real tomatoes growing here." Richard was lighter than Sarah had ever seen him. He still worked a lot. Old habits die hard. But now he left the office at 6 o'clock religiously for family dinners. He turned off his phone during meals. He dedicated entire Sundays to David, building the treehouse with his own hands, teaching his son how to use tools, creating memories that would last forever. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked one night, after David had fallen asleep and Mrs. Johnson had retreated to her unit. They were on the back porch, watching the stars that were surprisingly visible despite New York's light pollution. "Happier than I thought it would be possible to be again," Richard replied, pulling her closer on the porch sofa. "There are moments I feel guilty, like I don't have the right to be this happy when Emily isn't here to see David grow up. But then I remember what you told me, that she would want me to be happy, that she would want David to have a complete family and real love. And do you believe that now?" "I do believe it, because I see David thriving. I see him laughing without fear, making plans for the future without anxiety, talking about his mother with love but without paralyzing pain. And I know that's because you brought light back into our lives." "We brought light to each other," Sarah corrected. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You defended me when it cost a lot. You loved me when it was complicated." "It wasn't complicated. It was scary at times, it was challenging, but it was never complicated. From that first coffee, I knew you were special. It just took me time to have the courage to admit it." They sat in silence for a while. just enjoying the night, the scent of ripe cherries in the air, the distant sound of traffic that was the constant soundtrack of New York. "Richard?" Sarah eventually said. Thank you for not giving up. When everything was hard, when your mum was attacking, when it seemed like we could lose everything, you didn't give up." "How could I give up? You are the best thing that ever happened to me." And to David, "Giving up on you would be giving up on our future." November brought unexpected developments. Beatrice asked to visit the new house. The supervised visits had continued monthly, always tense, but gradually less hostile. Beatrice was clearly making an effort. She arrived with appropriate gifts for David. Books about dinosaurs, not overly expensive toys that seemed like an attempt to buy affection. Asked about school and friends with genuine interest, and most importantly, treated Sarah with careful respect. "I don't know if I'm ready for her here," Sarah admitted to Richard when he mentioned the request. "You don't have to be. I can meet her in a neutral place. No, this is going to be our home, our family. If she's going to be a part of this, it needs to be real, not just in neutral spaces and controlled visits." Sarah took a deep breath. "But I want Mrs. Johnson to be present, and you can't leave me alone with her for a second. Don't even think that I would do that." The visit was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon. Sarah spent the entire morning nervous, cleaning things that were already clean, rearranging cushions, preparing. Too much food. Her way of dealing with anxiety was always to cook. "Honey, you're going to end up making food for 30 people, Mrs. Johnson commented, watching Sarah prepare the fourth different dessert. I know, I just can't stop. I need to do something with my hands or I'm going to lose it." "She's just an old lady trying to fix her mistakes," Mrs. Johnson said gently. "Not a dragon coming to eat your sheep." "She called me a gold digger opportunist, Mum. Tried to take David away from Richard. Tried to bribe you. I can't. Forget that just because she's going to therapy. I'm not saying to forget. I'm saying to forgive. Those are different things. You can forgive and still remember. You can give her a chance and still keep your guard up. It doesn't have to be all or nothing." Sarah stopped stirring the cake frosting, finally looking at her mother. "How did you become so wise?" "By living a lot and making even more mistakes. Now stop making sweets and come help me set the table. She's arriving in an hour." When the doorbell rang, David ran to answer before anyone could stop him. "Grandma B." He still hesitated a bit, not jumping into her arms like he did with Mrs. Johnson, but there was genuine warmth in the greeting. Beatrice entered carrying a simple bouquet of flowers, not expensive imported roses, but colourful gerberas that anyone would give. She was dressed casually. Jeans. Sarah never thought she would see Beatrice Miller in jeans. A simple top, hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked 10 years younger and infinitely more approachable. "Sarah," she greeted, extending the flowers, "thank you for having me in your home." "Our home," Sarah corrected, "accepting the flowers. Mine, Richard's, David's, my mum's, all of us." "Our home," Beatrice repeated, waving. "Celia, are you well too?" "I am, Mrs. Miller," Mrs. Johnson replied, cordial but cautious. "Please, just Beatrice, I think it's time to drop the formalities, considering everything." The afternoon unfolded with surprise for everyone. Beatrice didn't try to take control, didn't make passive-aggressive comments, didn't criticize the decor choices or the neighborhood. Instead, she listened when David showed her his new room, genuinely impressed with the solar system on the ceiling, sat on the floor without complaint when David wanted to show off his entire collection of toy dinosaurs. "This is the Ankylosaurus," David explained, holding his favorite toy. "It's Sarah's favorite too. It's like a tank, well protected." "I see the resemblance," Beatrice said, and there was genuine humor in her voice when she looked at Sarah. "Well protected and seemingly indestructible." Sarah didn't know if it was a compliment or a jab, but decided to take it as the former. "I learned that sometimes you need armor to survive." And sometimes the armor becomes a prison, Beatrice replied softly. It's something I'm learning in therapy, that I spent so much time protecting myself that I forgot to live. The lunch was surprisingly pleasant. Beatrice sincerely praised the food in a way that felt genuine, asked about the Nutri-Real app, and truly listened to the answers, even offered suggestions for investors that Sarah could consider when it was time to expand internationally. I have contacts in Miami and Lisbon, she explained, markets that would be perfect for what you're building. If you want, I can make introductions. No pressure, just offering. Thank you, Sarah said, genuinely surprised. That would be very helpful. After lunch, when David dragged Beatrice to the garden, to show her the tomato seedlings that were starting to grow, Richard and Sarah were left alone in the kitchen washing dishes. She's different, Sarah admitted. Really different. I know. I still don't fully trust her, but it's a start. Do you think it's possible to truly forgive after everything? Richard stopped washing the dish he had in his hands, looking out the window at where his mum was crouched in the garden, getting her expensive jeans dirty with soil while listening to David explain about photosynthesis. I think forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let the past destroy future possibilities. She made mistakes, big ones, but she's trying to fix it, and I can recognize that without pretending the pain didn't exist. My mom said something similar earlier. Your mom is wise. She really is. Sarah dried her hands, turning to hug him from behind while he finished the dishes. We're really doing this, aren't we? Building a real family. Complicated, non-traditional, but real. We are. And you know what's crazy? What? I wouldn't change a thing. Not even the hard parts, because everything brought us here. December arrived with that characteristic humid heat of New York summer and an unexpected invitation, New York University. New York wanted Sarah as a speaker at a symposium on innovation in sports nutrition. It wasn't a small talk for students. It was the main event with established professionals, international researchers, and specialized press in attendance. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah confessed to Richard as they rehearsed the presentation for the 10th time. These people are PhDs with 20 years of experience. I've been a nutritionist for literally 1 year. You're the nutritionist who created a methodology being studied at 3 different universities. You built an app with 500,000 users. You changed the way hundreds of gyms approach nutrition. Richard paused the presentation. Sarah, you may have less time since graduating, but you have more practical impact than most of these PhDs. That counts. What if they dismiss me, if they see me as that girl who slept with the boss and don't take me seriously? Then that's their problem, not yours. But I bet it won't happen. Because when you talk about your work, when you show your data, there's no way they won't take you seriously. The talk took place on a Monday in December in the main auditorium of the medical school. 300 seats, all occupied. Sarah stepped onto the stage with sweaty hands and a racing heart, but then she saw in the front row Richard, David, who had skipped school just for this, Mrs. Johnson, and surprisingly Beatrice. Breathe, she whispered to herself. You know this by heart. It's your work, your life, your truth. And then she began. She spoke about how sports nutrition in Brazil was often either neglected or turned into a predatory industry, selling expensive supplements and unsustainable diets. She presented data on how her program at FitLife gyms had reduced unnecessary supplement use by 40% while improving actual results by 32%. She showed case studies, real people with real names, with permission, who had transformed not only their bodies, but also their relationships with food. The problem isn't a lack of information, Sarah said, clicking to a slide with impactful statistics. It's an excess of bad information. Every day a new miracle diet appears, a new magic supplement, a new promise of transformation in 30 days. And desperate people, because we live in a society that equates human value with physical appearance, spend money they don't have on solutions that don't work. My job isn't to sell dreams. It's to teach science in an accessible way. It's to demystify nutrition. It's to prove that you don't need to be rich to eat well. You don't need to starve to be healthy. And you don't need to buy 50 supplements to see results. The audience was completely absorbed. Even the skeptical professors in the front rows were taking notes. The Q&A session afterward was intense. Someone questioned a conflict of interest, working for a company that benefits from the program. Sarah responded with data showing that units implementing her program had higher profits, but also greater customer satisfaction and fewer cancellations. Everyone won, not just the company. Another asked about scalability, whether the methodology would work in regions beyond New York. Sarah opened a section of the app showing user data from all regions of the US, all social classes, all body types and goals. A particularly skeptical professor asked about academic qualifications, if she thought 1 year of experience qualified her to give talks at a university symposium. Sarah calmly replied that time since graduation wasn't the only measure of expertise, that she had published 5 peer-reviewed articles, 3 of them as the lead author, that she had been mentored by some of the best professionals in the country during internships, and that most importantly, she had measurable results that spoke for themselves. With all due respect, Professor, she concluded, I may have graduated a year ago, but I've been working in the field since I was 19. I took every available internship, read every relevant paper, studied with dedication that sacrificed my social life and sleep. So, yes, I believe I qualify. Not despite my time in training, but because of everything I've done with that time. The audience applauded. Even the skeptical professor nodded in acknowledgement. When she finished, several people approached her. Students wanting to know about the app, professors interested in academic collaboration, a representative from a publishing house wanting to discuss the possibility of a book. You were amazing, Richard said when he finally managed to reach her through the crowd. Absolutely incredible. Sarah is famous, David shouted, jumping. Everyone wants to talk to her. My daughter, Mrs. Johnson was crying again. It seemed to be her favorite activity lately. Speaking at a university, teaching professors. Even Beatrice seemed genuinely impressed. You have a natural talent for this. Have you thought about teaching? Several private universities would pay well for a professor with practical market experience. Maybe, Sarah said, still processing everything, but first I want to consolidate what I already have. One thing at a time. On Christmas Eve, the house in Brooklyn was decorated in a way that perfectly balanced tradition and modernity. David had insisted on a real Christmas tree because it smells better, and Sarah said we can plant it later. So, there was a small but sturdy pine tree in the living room, decorated with ornaments that David made at school, mixed with elegant glass balls that Beatrice contributed. Mrs. Johnson prepared a traditional holiday dinner. Turkey, stuffing, Greek rice, glazed ham, French toast. But Sarah added her nutritionally optimized versions, quinoa stuffing, French toast made with whole grain bread and natural sweetener, elaborate salads that looked like art. The table was set for 6, Sarah, Richard, David, Mrs. Johnson, Beatrice, and a symbolic empty space for Emily, an idea from David that made everyone cry but also brought peace. It's because she's still part of the family, David explained with the wisdom of a child. Just because she's not here doesn't mean we've forgotten. We never forget, Richard agreed, gently touching the empty place. Beatrice also brought a contribution, fine wine chosen with genuine taste. The sommelier said it pairs perfectly with turkey and also with people trying to start over, and a gift for each person, personally chosen, clearly with real thought. For David, a complete collection of books on paleontology. The gifts were age-appropriate. For Sarah, a kit of rare spices from around the world. I heard you mention wanting to try international cuisine. For Richard, a watch that had belonged to his father. He would want you to have it. And for Mrs. Johnson, a professional photo album made with all the pictures she found of Sarah and Richard over the years. Because you documented my son growing up through the photos you took in the apartment, Beatrice explained, her voice hoarse. I thought it was only fair that someone document your own story too. Mrs. Johnson flipped through the album with trembling hands, photos of her pregnant that she didn't even remember existed, of Sarah as a baby, Sarah as a child, awkward teenage Sarah, Sarah graduating. A whole life carefully and respectfully compiled. Thank you, was all Mrs. Johnson could manage to say, but it was enough. During the holiday dinner, amidst laughter and stories, and David ruining the punchline of the joke he insisted on telling 3 times, there was a moment of spontaneous silence. Everyone seemed to feel it at once, the weight of everything that had happened in the past year, the statistical improbability of all being together, deep gratitude for second chances. I want to make a toast, Richard said, raising his glass of wine, to family, not the one we were born into, but the one we choose to build. To chosen family, everyone echoed. And I want to thank, Richard continued, looking at Sarah, the woman who turned our house into a home, who taught my son about dinosaurs and nutrition and courage, who taught me that love is not replacement, but addition, that it is possible to honor the past while building the future. Sarah, you saved us, truly. We saved each other, Sarah replied, her eyes shining. I was a nutritionist. With a good project but no opportunity. You gave me a chance. David gave me purpose. Mrs. Johnson gave me strength. Even Beatrice, in the end, gave me motivation to prove my worth. She looked around the table. No one here saved themselves alone. We saved each other together. After the holiday dinner, while Mrs. Johnson and Beatrice did something unthinkable months ago, washing dishes together in the kitchen while chatting about a soap opera, Richard took Sarah to the back porch. I have a gift for you, he said, but it's too big to wrap. Bigger than a house, Sarah joked. In a way, yes. Richard took a deep breath, and Sarah noticed he was nervous. Sarah, this year it's been more intense than anything I've ever lived. There were moments I thought I wouldn't survive, moments I wanted to give up on everything, but you never did. You fought when I was scared. You believed when I doubted. You loved when it was hard. Richard, what? Let me finish before I lose my courage. He smiled nervously. I know it's quick. I know there are people who will say it's too soon, that we should wait longer. But I also know that when it's right, there's no wrong time. And this is right, Sarah. You are right. We are right. It was then that he knelt down, pulling a small blue velvet box from his pocket. Sarah Johnson, will you marry me? The world stopped. Sarah heard David shout, He's proposing! From the kitchen, heard Mrs. Johnson sob loudly, heard Beatrice say, Finally. But everything felt distant, muffled, because she could only focus on Richard, kneeling there on the porch under the stars, offering not just a ring, but a lifetime of partnership and love. Yes, she said, her voice coming out more like a sob. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. The ring was perfect, not ostentatious, not over the top, but clearly chosen with care. A modest diamond surrounded by small blue topazes. The color of your eyes, Richard explained as he slipped it onto her finger. I wanted you to always remember how I see you. David came running out of the kitchen and jumped on them, creating a chaotic group hug. Mrs. Johnson followed, and even Beatrice joined in from the sidelines, waving her approval while wiping her own eyes. Are we getting married? David asked, looking between the two. We are, Sarah confirmed. Me, you, and your dad. A real family. And Grandma Johnson, and even Grandma Bea? Expanded family, Richard said. Everyone we love. This is the best Christmas ever, David shouted, running back inside to announce to no one in particular, since everyone already knew. Later that night, after David fell asleep exhausted from emotion, after Beatrice left with a promise to help with wedding planning, I know I messed up a lot, but let me do this right. After Mrs. Johnson retired to her unit, Richard and Sarah were alone on the porch again. It doesn't have to be a big wedding, Sarah said. No need for ostentation or a party for 300 guests. I know. It can be at the beach, in the garden here, at the courthouse, wherever you want, as long as it ends with you being my wife. Wife, Sarah tested the word, Sarah Miller or Sarah Johnson Miller, or just Sarah Johnson still. We'll decide. We decide everything together. That's how it works now. They stayed there until late, making vague plans that turned into laughter, discussing whether David could bring stuffed dinosaurs to the ceremony. Obviously he can. Deciding they wanted something intimate and meaningful instead of big and impersonal. I think I want it in the garden here, Sarah eventually said, with a cherry tree as a witness. Just close family and real friends, no showing up for the press or making a statement, just us. Perfect. And you know what else? What? I love you. More today than yesterday. And I will love you more tomorrow than today. Because that's how true love works. It doesn't diminish over time, it multiplies. You romantic, Sarah teased. But she was crying again, only with you. The year ended with a quiet New Year's Eve at home. No elaborate party, no expensive fireworks, just the five of them. Richard, Sarah, David, Mrs. Johnson, and surprisingly Beatrice, who had been invited and accepted shyly, on the porch, watching the distant fireworks from other celebrations, counting. As the seconds ticked down to midnight, when the clock struck 0 and the sky filled with lights, David shouted, "Happy New Year!" with enthusiasm that made the neighborhood dogs bark. They toasted with sparkling juice, grape juice for David, embraced each other, and made promises they intended to keep. "My New Year's wish," David announced, "is that everything stays just like this. Happy." "It won't always be happy," Richard said honestly. "There will be tough days, complicated moments, but we'll face them together." "Together," Sarah echoed. "Together," Mrs. Johnson and Beatrice said in unison, then looked at each other in surprise and laughed. And there, on that night in December, turning into January, under the New York sky, painted gold and silver by fireworks, 5 people, each carrying their own scars, their own fears, their own stories of loss and struggle, found something more precious than any professional or financial achievement. They found belonging. They found acceptance. They found love in its purest and most complicated forms. And unlike fairy tales that end with happily ever after, as if happiness were a destination instead of a daily choice, they entered the new year knowing that building a true family, true love, true life, was continuous work. But it was work that would be worth every second, every challenge, every tear and every laugh, because in the end, it wasn't about reaching the perfect ending. It was about choosing every day to build together, and they were ready for it, completely, absolutely, wonderfully ready.